Chapter 1. Jing woke up from the long and absent-minded nightmare. As soon as he opened his eyes, he could not help but tremble all over. He subconsciously blurted out, "It's a monster." The familiar bedside table was gone. The dark red floor and the room with the green wallpaper had also disappeared without trace. Instead, it was replaced by a vast jungle that stretched as far as the eye could see and a steaming primitive swamp. A skinny black beast was crawling on the ground, staring straight at him with its slightly yellow, vertical pupils. Seeing such a scene as soon as he opened his eyes, no one would be able to remain calm. What the hell is this place? Wasn't I sleeping at home after an all-nighter? Jing's mind was blank. Even if there were thousands of reasons, he should not have appeared in such a place no matter what. The giant beast in front of him was thin and ferocious. There were not many muscles on its body, but its joints were abnormally thick. Its wings were almost made up of bones and skin, and the bones on its cheeks were even more rugged. The protruding parts even pierced through the skin and were exposed to the outside like a skeleton. It stared at the cub that had just crawled out of the eggshell. Its throat rolled, and it let out a muffled roar of unknown meaning. This is a dragon? Am I dreaming? Jing licked his dry lips. The ferocious creature in front of him was very much like the black dragon in fantasy works. As a fan of all kinds of games, he naturally recognized it. Then, Jing found that in this strange dream, he himself had also become a baby dragon. A newborn black dragon cub, the size of a colt, with tender red and transparent mucus still hanging on its body. As the sharp pain in his brain flashed past, a series of unfamiliar fragments were injected into Jing's brain. They swarmed and connected with his memory. I really became a dragon? Jing shook his head. With the addition of the memory fragments, he finally sorted out his messy thoughts. Caesar Orderonso Tangerine. This was his dragon's real name. The newborn baby dragon completed its task very well, but as the dragon's real name was uttered, the majestic dragon's inheritance also came in an instant. This baby dragon cub did not have time to temporarily separate and seal the inheritance according to the Dragon Clan's operation guide before its brain was crushed by the huge amount of knowledge and became a degenerated dragon idiot. Jing took advantage of the situation and took over the magpie's nest. The memories answered his most confused questions one by one. He did not need to read or filter them, as if they were his own experiences. One had to know that dreams had no logic. It was absolutely impossible to present so many details. Moreover, in just an instant, he had already understood the basic knowledge of the dragon race, the dragon language, and the common language. Thousands of syllables were imprinted in his mind. This was not a dream. He had traveled to a fantasy world that was completely different from Earth. He had changed from a brick-moving dog to the cub of the five-color black dragon. How did something as unscientific as transmigration happen? He couldn't find an answer for the time being. The fact that he had turned into a beast couldn't be rejected, and there was no customer service to appeal to. Fortunately, Jing wasn't a person who blamed himself. He could only accept reality, control his emotions, and not spend his time and energy on useless things. Fortunately, the Black Dragon Cub's original memories were all inherited by Jing. Although the little baby dragon failed to inherit the dragon's inheritance, it still retained the most basic knowledge of dragons and merged with him. He had become a dragon, a notorious black dragon whose strength was not very reliable. In fact, in this world, except for the shame of dragons, the white dragon, the black dragon of the same age, had almost no power to fight back against any other five-colored dragon or metal dragon. Whether it was magic attainments or physical strength, they would be easily hung up and beaten. Such an awkward position was indeed not good news for him. However, he now had a more urgent practical problem to solve: adapting to the life of a dragon. The little baby dragon avoided the gaze of the black dragon's mother and calmed down in the shortest time possible. Under the suspicious and scrutinizing gaze of the terrifying black beast, it licked the mucus all over its body clean. Without much time to think, in order not to increase the suspicion of the black dragon's mother, Jing immediately turned around and faced the fragments he had created. He began to gnaw on the eggshells. The eggshells that contained energy could allow him to survive the starvation period when he was just born. It provided enough energy to activate his body and allow him to grow and develop for the first time. Jing knew that he had to become strong as soon as possible. Even if it was a giant dragon at the top of the food chain, a newborn cub could not avoid the current situation of being weak. It could barely do it by breathing, but these little guys needed a few hours before they could run freely, let alone look for food on their own. The basic knowledge of dragons gave him a lot of benefits. He did not need to filter and read. This knowledge naturally appeared in his mind, allowing Jing to understand everything after a short moment of sluggishness. In front of the black dragon's mother, he acted more like a baby dragon instead of an outsider who had taken over her child's body. "It tastes good," Jing muttered in the dragon language. The hard eggshells were as fragile as potato chips in the baby dragon's mouth. In his opinion, the taste of this thing was indeed similar to potato chips. Yes, seaweed taste. All kinds of messy thoughts appeared in the muddle-headed baby dragon's mind. He, who had seamlessly merged with the dragon's memories, was not afraid of the giant dark beast not far away. Instead, he felt a sense of respect. Just as Jing was sucking the mucus on the eggshells, his younger brother and sister in the dragon sense were also born. The two baby dragons crawled out of the dragon eggs and let out a loud and sharp dragon roar. They recited a series of real names that were long enough to make one's head hurt. Compared to the adult black dragon, the newborn baby dragon's limbs were thick and short, and its wings were soft. Its head took up a large proportion of its body. Although it could not stand steadily, the sharp teeth in its mouth had already begun to take shape. Jing stared at the newborn baby dragon and saw his own appearance in it. At the same time, while the female baby dragon beside him raised her head and roared to accept the inheritance, he quietly moved his body and stretched out his young claws in a jerky manner. He shamelessly picked up a piece of the eggshell that had been broken by the other party. Oh, after biting down, this fellow's eyes narrowed like a squirrel's. The taste was actually different. The taste of cumin. Jing happily chewed and swallowed the stolen piece of egg. Then, when the little female dragon was not paying attention, he stretched out his young claws again. Just as he was happily grabbing another piece of egg, a huge, craggy mouth reached over and grabbed the little dragon that was trying to steal the egg with its limbs and tail wriggling nonstop. After a few bumps, the little dragon was thrown to another place. The black dragon's eyes were dyed with a faint yellow color. In the center was a thin and vertical pupil, just like a cat's eyes. It had a wide field of vision. The black dragon's mother stared at him, her eyes full of warning. She let out a low growl of dissatisfaction, as if she was reprimanding him. At this time, the little female dragon also noticed the scene here. This little female dragon was slightly smaller than Jing. There were two slender, sharp horns on the top of her head that extended behind her ears. The newly formed bone on her nose was still very soft. Her wings were powerless and drooped limply. The little female dragon glared at Caesar angrily and let out a childish roar. Green acid dripped from her mouth. As the black dragon with the worst temper and extremely selfish, Jing's behavior was enough to annoy his sister, even though he was the black dragon's biological child. If it were not for the suppression of the black dragon's mother, these two newborn dragons would probably have fought immediately, even if it was difficult for them to even stand still. However, Jing, who had taken advantage of the situation, had already thrown this matter to the back of his mind. He did not respond to his sister's roar. Instead, he swayed his body that had not yet fully adapted and slipped to the side to think about his dragon life. This was a sign of weakness in the eyes of the baby dragon, so the little female dragon snorted proudly and lowered her head to gnaw on her own eggshell. She no longer looked for trouble with her ugly brother. An unknown world. As a visitor from another world, Jing could not help but begin to worry about his future. A fantasy world with a dragon, needless to say, was much more dangerous and cruel than the earth where he was just muddling along. However, his luck was not bad. At least he did not become a lower species like a kobold or a gnome. Moreover, The existence of the black dragon's mother also gave Chun-Jing a lot of security. Thinking of this, he quickly swam towards the shore. He did not leave the range of the black dragon's mother's gaze. When he reached a place where the water was shallow, he buried his body in the sand at the edge of the swamp and revealed a small part of his head to observe the surrounding situation. The surrounding was a forest covered with thick fog. There was a whistling waterfall in the distance. The rapid water in the river bank flowed in all directions, creating countless swamps. It seemed that this place was not bad. In an uninhabited, primitive rainforest, at least there was no shortage of food. Come to think of it, their mother had already reached the prime of her life. Black Dragon at this age would no longer mate and lay eggs randomly in the countryside. They would carefully choose a suitable environment to build their nest and know how to protect the growth of their offspring. He had become a weak black dragon cub, but with his birth mother watching over him, he was not completely helpless. All in all, it was a good start. Black dragon, huh? All right. Chun-Jing stared at the slightly ugly cub in the lake and whispered, "From now on, I am Caesar Orderonso, with Tangerine as my surname." Before he could think carefully, the baby dragon cub Caesar was captured by an uncontrollable sense of drowsiness. The first slumber of a dragon came fiercely and quickly. He only had time to sink into the sand before falling into a deep sleep. Chapter 2. Thanks to the evolution and evolution of living creatures, the baby dragons were able to use the energy absorbed from eating egg slices to activate various important organs and begin to develop and grow through the adjustment of their muscles. This stage was not considered long, and it only lasted for about a day. When little Caesar woke up and surfaced, he found that the sun was just right. It was about noon, and the light was able to penetrate the layers of thick fog into the swamp, scattering a golden luster that was warm and pleasant. But the black dragon mother, as well as her brothers and sisters, were deeply disgusted by such a climate, and a feeling of irritation seeped through them. They let out a low hiss and hid in the deeper shadows of the swamp. The black dragon likes gloomy swamps and quagmires. The dirtier and filthier, the better. This was the knowledge that basic cognition told Caesar, but fortunately, he did not inherit this habit. However, in order to avoid being weird, the awakened baby dragons also let out 2 hisses and went into the nest built by the black dragon's mother. At this time, the baby dragons could already breathe and run, and they had a certain level of defensive ability. However, they were still young and weak, and they were not even a match for some ordinary large creatures. They still needed the protection of the black dragon's mother. The mother dragon lay lazily in the nest, and her body was covered with hard, dark scales. The black dragon's head was thin and long, and the skin without muscles was tightly attached to the bones. The craggy skull made it look like it was wearing a layer of armor. Compared to the adult black dragon, the baby dragons did not look so thin and shriveled. Their necks were thick and short, their heads were big and round, and their scales were thin and black, reflecting a metallic luster. However, with the passage of time, the baby dragons would gradually become like their mother. Their scales would become harder and darker. In the process of growth and development, their skulls would also become sharp, sticking closely to the epidermis and even piercing through the skin. Although this change would not cause any harm to the black dragon, it would make them more terrifying and difficult to approach. Therefore, the black dragon was also known as the skeleton dragon. At this time, the black dragon's mother had prepared food for the children, a huge violet head fish. This strange fish was as big as 5 baby dragons, and its barbed fangs stuck out of its mouth. Soaked in the acid swamp, the strong smell of rotten meat and fish went into the nostrils of every baby dragon. Caesar could even see the maggots wriggling on the rotten meat. The black dragon rarely ate red meat. In non-emergency situations, they would usually marinate their prey with acid for many days before eating. Such a rotten, violent head fish was definitely a rare delicacy in the eyes of the black dragon. The 2 dragon whelps, who could already run freely, surrounded him while babbling. They did not avoid other foreign objects and swallowed them in large mouthfuls. The digestive system of dragons was like a furnace that could digest everything that they ate. Not to mention the maggots on the rotten meat. Even metals were the same. Motherf asterisk Kerr. As a mutated black dragon with a human soul, little Caesar felt bitterness in his throat as he watched his brothers, who were eating happily and slurping their saliva. However, he could not refuse. The black dragon's mother's gaze had already swept over with a scrutinizing look. She looked at the little guy whose behavior was different from other baby dragons when he was born. Ugh! Caesar clenched his baby teeth so hard that they creaked. His tears were a little sore, but he could not refuse. Even if he went to search for food himself, he would probably only find some wild fruits, rats, and worms to fill his stomach. It was probably not as nutritious as this violent head fish. He had no choice but to close his eyes and bite off a piece of meat from the rotten fish. His throat rolled as if he had swallowed a deadly poison. The white, fat, and large maggots from another world were chewed up by his sharp teeth. Its meat was as soft as cotton, and its juice burst in his mouth. The little dragon, whose eyes were tightly shut, suddenly paused. His vertical pupils lit up. This thing was not as hard to swallow as he had imagined. After overcoming the psychological discomfort, the black dragon's sensory system gave him a completely different feedback. It was actually a little delicious. Caesar took another bite of the rotten fish. After confirming that his sense of taste was not wrong, he began to gulp down the food like the other two baby dragons. The baby dragon's appetite was astonishingly large. After dozens of minutes, the violent head fish, which was incomparably huge to the little dragons, was eaten until only its skeleton was left. Even some of the brittle bones were chewed up and swallowed by the baby dragons. In order to maintain the consumption brought about by their strong bodies, dragons generally had an astonishingly large appetite. Even the young baby dragons were the same. They ate food that was several times their own weight, but they did not look bloated at all. This level of appetite was an extremely heavy burden for the baby dragons who did not have the support of their parents. Fortunately, if there were no accidents, dragons would usually accompany their offspring for 1 to 6 years. Therefore, the baby dragons at this time did not need to worry about food. After the two baby dragons finished eating, they floated on the swamp and rolled around in the quagmire. They let the mud cover their bodies and enjoyed the moist and salty air. To the true dragons, there was no concept of learning and meditation. After receiving the inheritance of the dragon, even if the baby dragons were to play and sleep from the beginning to the end, they would still gradually awaken their magic abilities as they continued to grow in the future. They would gradually climb to the top of the food chain. However, Caesar was different. Other than some basic knowledge about dragons, he did not have any inherited knowledge about talents and magic in his mind. Strictly speaking, he was actually no different from the defective products that were naturally eliminated and degenerated into dragon beasts. Under such circumstances, in order to grow faster, he had to eat more than the other baby dragons. After completing his normal meal, Caesar even had to add more food for himself. This little baby dragon with a soul from another world resisted the desire to relax his body and take a short nap. He left the small swamp where the baby dragons rested and approached the riverbank. He stepped on solid, hard soil. That's right, Caesar was ready to eat soil. The digestive system of dragons allowed them to eat anything they could swallow, such as dead wood, rocks, and other inorganic substances. However, most of the true dragons hated these things and felt ashamed of them. Among them, the most noteworthy ones were the arrogant red dragon and the golden dragon. They regarded eating inorganic substances as a great humiliation. Even if they were in a desperate situation, the red dragon would rather starve than touch these things. However, Caesar learned from the basic knowledge of dragons that eating inorganic substances could speed up the hardening of the scales. At this stage, it was difficult for the scales of the baby dragons to play any role. They were tender and thin and could be torn apart easily. Only as they grew older would they slowly become hard and thick. Although eating metals and stones could not make the scales of the true dragon stronger, it could greatly accelerate the maturation of the scales. Caesar did not just swallow everything. He first used his sharp claws to dig away the mud and turned over the moist soil to sift out the inorganic minerals below. Ugh, cough, cough. After swallowing all kinds of stones with difficulty, the black dragon cub took a big gulp of the pool water and then coughed. This thing was simply too disgusting. Even he, who had both human and dragon tastes, found it unbearable. He wanted to vomit, but there was no other way. This was the pain of growing up. Caesar comforted himself. Even as a species at the top of the food chain, the baby dragons of the true dragons also had a high rate of premature death. Some powerful creatures could be immune to the influence of draconic aura and poach the baby dragons when the mother dragons were looking for food. Moreover, even an adult black dragon was not completely invincible. In this terrifying world, many creatures had the ability to fight against the true dragons and even hunt the true dragons for food, not to mention the greater dangers in the Underdark. The creatures that lived here would easily be shrouded in an indescribable fear called adventurers. God knows how far the terrifying upright apes of this world had expanded their diet. Caesar's actions were naturally seen by the black dragon's mother. But for the cub's strange behavior, the black dragon's mother did not care and had an indifferent attitude. This baby dragon had said the dragon's true name to prove its identity as a true dragon. According to the instructions of the evil dragon's mother, Tiamat, she must fulfill her duty of breeding. As for other things, the lazy Pinochet dragon did not want to ask. In fact, the notorious black dragon would not put too much effort into its own offspring. It could be said that it was cold-hearted. Breeding was just a part of its duty. When the cub grew to a certain extent, they would even expel their parents for their own territory and treasures. Evil dragons were like this. What a freak. The two baby dragons that were soaking in the mud conversed in the draconic language. Their senses were very sensitive, so they naturally knew what their brother was doing. Baby dragons were not ignorant creatures. To a certain extent, they were born with knowledge. They had a grasp of the world as a whole and an understanding of their own identity. They were born knowing that they would be one of the most powerful creatures in the world sooner or later. They were born with an innate pride and sense of superiority. Therefore, the two baby dragons despised Caesar Ordoronso's actions, thinking that he was degrading his identity as a true dragon. The baby dragons despised their nominal brother. However, a soul that came from another world would not care about the opinions of the dragons. Under the questioning gazes of the two young dragons, Caesar spent a lot of time swallowing the inorganic minerals that were hard to swallow one by one. Only then did he let out a long sigh of satisfaction. Chapter 3. On the third day of their birth, the baby dragons were already able to run, bite, and play freely. They even tried to hunt on their own. All the black dragon, regardless of their age, strength, or weakness, had the same habits. When they were hunting, they preferred to use the strategy of ambushing instead of taking the initiative to chase and kill. They would lie in ambush in the muddy river and wait for their prey to take the bait. In the river filled with humus, the three baby dragons lay quietly in the mud at the bottom of the river. Their dark scales provided the best camouflage. They blended into the mud at the bottom of the river, revealing only their vertical pupils. Like a crocodile, they stared at the fish above their heads and were ready to attack. Not far away, the black dragon's mother restrained her breath and crouched among the ferns, watching her offspring's first hunt. However, the results did not seem to be good. After an entire afternoon, the three children of the black dragon's mother had gained nothing. The baby dragons were still too young and could not control their gradually formed ferocious aura ability, the legendary draconic aura. As a result, the prey was already vigilant from afar and would not go near where the baby dragons were lying in ambush. On the other hand, Caesar, who was downstream, often had fish and prawns swimming past him. It was not that he was gifted, but this guy had not received the inheritance of the dragon and could not form a spell-like ability at all. Under such circumstances, the prey knew nothing about the little Caesar who was crouching at the bottom of the mud. But even so, he did not gain anything. The sensitivity of the fish in the other world was far beyond Caesar's imagination. Whenever he was ready to make a move, the The fish could sense the abnormality from the vibration of the mud and the flow of the river. They avoided him like frightened birds. Before he could jump out from the bottom of the river, the prey had already fled. The other two baby dragons did not feel anything. After all, they would become predators at the top of the food chain sooner or later. To them, hunting like this was more like a form of leisure entertainment. Caesar, on the other hand, was not so comfortable. The failure of the hunt brought him a lot of frustration, so much so that when the young dragon crawled out from the bottom of the river, he could not help but sigh when he saw his wet and filthy body. Uncomfortable. To make matters worse, as time passed, he gradually became more and more different from the other two dragon whelps. Most intuitively, the two fledglings already possessed a ferocious aura and could start to fly. They only needed to lightly flap their wings, and it would be enough for them to leave the ground. On the other hand, no matter how hard Caesar tried to flap his wings and raise a whistling hurricane, he could not make himself fly. If one wanted to fly, one had to abide by the laws of physics. There was a fixed relationship between weight, power, and wingspan. Caesar stared at the two dragon whelps. From the perspective of Earth, their wings, and even the wings of the black dragon's mother, were a little small. The rising force they generated was not enough to support the flight of dragons. The ratio of their wings to their body weight was seriously unbalanced. Logically speaking, they were too heavy to fly. However, dragons were magical creatures. Wings were only an aid to dragons. What really allowed them to soar in the sky was magic, the natural ability of dragons. This was the biggest difference between Caesar and the other two dragon whelps. Without magic, what the dragon whelps could do easily was like a natural barrier to him. However, Caesar was already mentally prepared. He was not too upset. He knew that it was meaningless to compare himself with the other dragon whelps. The most important thing now was to make himself stronger as soon as possible so that he could have a certain level of self-protection in this Underdark. Then, he would leave the lair of the black dragon's mother. Although the black dragon was not known for its wisdom, and a black dragon's mother was also not considered wise, her level of intelligence was definitely not lower than that of an adult human. As the dragon whelps grew up day by day, the black dragon's mother would sooner or later discover that Caesar was different. As the most violent and vicious of the dragon species, the black dragon's world was famous for its cruelty. They were merciless when dealing with degenerated defective products. Banishing them was considered a light punishment. Facing the black dragon who had deceived him, the black dragon had the possibility of directly killing him. Soon, Caesar discovered that in the next few days, his food began to shrink. It was 30% less than usual. Although the black dragon's mother did not discover the truth, she still treated him as an inferior dragon whelp who did not develop as well as the other dragon whelps. Under the natural rule of survival of the fittest, he was naturally ignored by the mother dragon. This won't do. A few days later, Caesar climbed out of his mother's swamp lair while the black dragon whelps were sleeping soundly. Newborn dragon whelps needed to eat a lot to meet the needs of growth and development. However, with their mother's lazy temperament, she was not willing to spend any more energy on hunting for inferior dragon whelps. This caused Caesar's food supply to decrease day by day. It even reached a harsh level. Anyway, he won't starve to death. Moreover, can't this dragon whelp eat soil? This was the thought of the black dragon's mother. Caesar knew that the current situation would only get worse as time went by. Sooner or later, I'll be played to death. Even if he had been devouring inorganic substances to fill his stomach, the growth of the dragon whelps without sufficient nutrition had gradually stagnated. During this period of time, his twin brothers and sisters had the tendency to approach or even surpass him in size. However, these two dragon whelps were pure true dragons. They were constantly acquiring knowledge of dragons and awakening magic abilities. He could not be compared to them. Caesar did not care about being surpassed by the two dragon whelps. He only wanted to grow as much as possible so that he could have the ability to protect himself. I can't rely on my mother anymore. I have to hunt by myself. Caesar thought that if he continued to stay in a daze, the situation would continue to worsen as the food supply decreased. Sooner or later, he would lose the ability to continue to grow. When the vicious mother found out that he was just a defective dragon whelp, he would only have a dead end. Under such circumstances, Caesar decided to take the risk and go out to hunt by himself. The dragon whelp's tail swayed as it pushed aside the ferns and drilled into the dense bushes. Its slender body disappeared just like that. For any dragon whelp that had just been born not long ago, the jungle was a dangerous place full of dangers. However, he had no choice but to take the risk. The dragon whelp carefully passed through the dense weeds and thorns. Its heart was beating nonstop. It knew that it was a pure newbie. If it was not careful, it would turn from a predator to a prey. At this time, it had to be careful and prudent enough to survive in this terrifying shadow jungle. Fortunately, before this, Caesar had already formulated a detailed hunting plan and selected his prey, carnivorous mammals. He was not as picky as the ordinary black dragon. He would only eat fish, prawns, and aquatic animals. Those ordinary creatures that were strong but did not possess any magic abilities were the best food for him now. They could provide him with sufficient fresh meat and nutrition. However, the prerequisite was that he had to catch them first. Just like the fishes in another world, the mammal's sense of hearing and smell was also extremely sensitive. Moreover, they were in the jungle. Any slight movement in the wind and grass would alert these creatures. Fortunately, dragons, as predators at the top of the food chain, had long evolved a series of highly adaptable organs. The fleshy protrusions at the bottom of his claws allowed him to walk silently in the forest. Caesar's dragon wings were very small compared to his body weight. He could not fly at all without using magic. However, the upward force generated by the light flap of his wings was enough to allow him to glide smoothly across the ground that was full of humus. His movements were even more stealthy. However, this was not enough. Caesar, who had the experience of failing to catch fish, knew that this alone was not enough to let him return with a full harvest. Although he was strong and his scales were hard, his speed had become this dragon whelp's Achilles heel. The dragon whelp was seriously biased. It was sluggish and slow in terms of agility. If he wanted to rely on surprise attacks, hunting, and other conventional methods to complete the hunt, it was simply too much for Caesar. It was almost impossible. He had to use his body more cleverly. Caesar burrowed into the bottom of the bushes and dug up the hard soil. He used the black mud to hide his body very well. He felt the flow of the wind and lay dormant quietly. He was determining the direction of the wind and choosing a target position where he could hunt. After waiting for a while, when the smell of the black dragon's mother had almost dissipated from his body, Caesar began to move his throat. Huff, huff, under the cover of the thorns, the dragon whelp let out a few pig cries. Chapter 4. It was indeed the sound of a pig. Caesar made the sound of a wild boar in the jungle. This was not magic, but a hunting method that he had figured out during this period of time. Dragons had an extremely wide vocal range. Through the delicate control of the airflow in their throat and the vibration of their vocal tract, they could almost imitate the sounds of most creatures. Of course, most dragons would not do this. Imitating other creatures was also a form of humiliation to them. However, Caesar did not have any psychological burden in this regard. This was also the reason why he left the river and entered the jungle, choosing to hunt carnivorous mammals. Although he could also imitate the sounds of fish, it was difficult to lure suitable prey in the swamp. Oh, Caesar kept his breathing steady. The rheumatic heat of the jungle was gentle. Soon, the prey took the bait. A jungle tiger, this kind of king at the top of the food chain on Earth in his previous life, could only be reduced to the bottom of the pyramid in this bizarre world. In the Underdark, jungle tigers played the role of prey. Although the scales were small, they were still tough. Even as a young dragon, it had great strength. This gave Caesar a certain amount of confidence. He had the capital to defeat all beasts of his size, as long as the opponent was not a violent species. Violent species was a general term for a series of special, enhanced creatures. Perhaps the red dragon's young could, but he knew that at his age, the black dragon would definitely not be able to provoke a monster of that level. A few violent wolves had the ability to kill him. Fortunately, the one that took the bait was only an ordinary carnivorous creature, a wild tiger. After careful observation, Caesar judged that the target was similar to the South China tiger that he had seen in his previous life. Its entire body was orange and covered with black horizontal stripes. The high arched-back muscles showed this guy's strong strength. The tiger heard the wild boar's howl and was sniffing its nose towards Caesar's position. Caesar controlled the flow of his breath and continued to mumble, making a gentle and rhythmic sound. Obviously, this wild boar did not notice anything strange. Separated by layers of shrubs, Caesar, who was hidden in the soil, watched the tiger pace, quietly approaching, gradually reaching the tiger's killing range. But in the next second, the wild tiger stopped, maintaining a safe distance. Had he been discovered? No, it was just that nursing animals were cautious by nature. Even though there was delicious food in front of it, the tiger knew that it was never the king of the jungle. Therefore, it stood still and began to pace and observe carefully. What should he do? Should he just kill him? Or should he continue to wait? The tiger's actions put Caesar in a dilemma. He was a complete novice. If he pounced directly at this time, he was not sure if he could succeed in one hit at this distance. If he failed to kill it, it would be almost impossible for a baby dragon to catch up with an adult cat. However, if the prey sensed that something was amiss and immediately fled, his half a day of waiting would be wasted. Don't be anxious, don't be anxious. Caesar comforted himself and forcibly suppressed his chaotic thoughts. He calmed himself down and slightly changed the tone of the wild boar, letting out a sharp hiss. The prey seemed to be in pain. It seemed to be injured. Was it entangled by the bush? This thought popped up in the tiger's limited thoughts. After a few more seconds, it couldn't wait any longer. It took 2 steps forward, arched its back, and plunged directly into the bushes. Roar! The tiger's roar shook the forest. Unfortunately, it was fooled. What was waiting for it was not a sumptuous meal, but a fatal trap. The moment the ferocious tiger leaped, the soil in front of it was instantly overturned. The black baby dragon collided with it, and its sharp claws immediately pierced into its soft fur. The tiger, which grew up in the forest, had obviously never seen such a sinister dragon. It was caught off guard, and its abdomen was cleanly torn apart. Then, Caesar rolled together with it, ignoring the fierce struggle of the tiger. In the continuous roar of the tiger, he roared and broke its cervical vertebra. Success. When everything was over, the baby dragon let go of the dead tiger and lay back on the ground again. Its tail drooped, and it slowly exhaled. This hunt was not considered exhausting for a dragon, but the real pressure came from the mental burden. In his previous life, Caesar had not even killed a chicken, let alone a tiger. Although this guy was not afraid of the terrifying black dragon's mother, it was only because of their parentage. If it was not for the fact that he desperately held his breath and fought a fierce tiger at the top of the food chain in his previous life, he would not have been able to hold on mentally. It's still too inexperienced. Caesar whispered, panting. In hindsight, the moment the wild tiger pounced into the bushes, it was already sentenced to death. He could have bitten off the tiger's neck as easily as a real predator. There was no need to roll and fight at all, and it would take more effort. Learn from experience and reflect on mistakes. Caesar narrowed his eyes and reflected for a while. After a short pause to think, the baby dragon drank the blood that was constantly gushing out of the tiger's wound. Then, it held the prey in its mouth and left the forest as quickly as possible. He did not dare to eat on the spot. In the dangerous dark forest, the smell of blood would attract more predators. God knows what kind of terrifying creatures there would be. The current Caesar was not strong, and he had to be cautious at all times. Therefore, even if his stomach was unbearably hungry and he had lost a lot of fresh tiger blood on the bumpy journey, Caesar still endured the heartache and dragged the tiger's corpse back. Time passed as he shuttled through the forest. When he safely returned to the swamp and reached the area of influence of the black dragon's mother's draconic power, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. His hanging heart was put down, and he could not wait to start eating. For the black dragon, what kind of experience was eating fresh meat? It was like a person who had always eaten sliced white meat, and it was the first time he had eaten spicy fried meat. Caesar narrowed his eyes. The black dragon's sensory system did not make him reject rotten meat, but red meat felt more fresh and delicious to him, making him unable to stop. Would he cry if he were to eat cooked meat one day? He tilted his head, and there was still blood at the corner of his mouth. He was amused by his own thoughts and laughed. It seemed that being a dragon was not bad. At least he could eat all over the world, and he did not have to worry about his stomach being too spicy or sour. However, before Caesar could be happy for even a moment, his face quickly turned gloomy again. The young dragon sighed, lowered its head, and walked towards the riverbank, swaying from side to side. Because it was time to eat soil after eating. The pain of growing up, my slightly sour childhood. This thing is really King disgusting. The sky gradually darkened. Caesar returned to his own little corner in the black dragon's nest to rest. The two baby dragons were sleeping soundly under the wings of the black dragon's mother, and they were snoring loudly. The trip to the forest made Caesar extremely tired. He crawled and curled up on the ground, and soon fell into a deep sleep. After an unknown amount of time, the groggy Caesar's consciousness gradually became clear again. He realized that he was no longer in the nest of the black dragon's mother. Looking around, there was only darkness that could not be wiped away. There was a light source right in front of him. Caesar was not surprised. In fact, ever since he arrived in this world, he would have the same dream every time he fell asleep. In the body of the black dragon, he came to this uninhabited and dark place. However, it was different this time. There was light in the darkness. Chapter 5. The recurring dream made Caesar feel strange. He realized that this was not an ordinary dream. There was no reason for him to be in the same place for several days in a row. Moreover, he was still conscious and could remember the scene in the dream the next day. However, this dark dream that had been appearing ever since he had transmigrated into a dragon was so strange that it made people scratch their heads in confusion. There was no guide in this place, nor was there anything like a beginner's guide. If there was a feedback system like user reviews, Caesar would definitely give it a bad review and complain. However, the reality of the situation was that he could only combine his experiences after his transmigration to explore this pitch-black place. However, every time he explored, he would only end up with nothingness. Fortunately, it was different this time. There were no lights or torches around, but there was a light that came from nowhere that illuminated the black dream. It was like a sharp sword that broke the dawn, dispersing the thick fog. A huge display cabinet appeared in front of him. Even with the vision of a dragon, the cabinet that appeared out of nowhere was huge. It was unknown how tall it was, and he couldn't see the end of it. The top of the cabinet was submerged in the darkness of the black dream. Caesar's hooked toes gently scratched its lacquered surface. The cabinet's structure was neat, and the surface was thick and smooth. It was made of an unknown material, and it made a crisp metallic sound when it collided with his claws. Looking up, one could see that there were actually many treasures placed inside, trophies. They were neatly placed in the display window, reflecting all kinds of luster under the light. The transparent glass allowed him to see through, and Caesar saw that although they were the same shape, their colors and materials were different. Bronze, black jade, pure gold, white diamond. He did not doubt the authenticity of these expensive materials. The bright luster was irreplaceable. They lay quietly in the cabinet like treasures of the Golden Age. Caesar glanced at them. The fine vision of a dragon was amazing. He could even clearly see the small words engraved on the base of the trophy. Nuclear fusion power reactor. Exoskeleton biological armor. Force field generator. Neutron star life form reconstruction. Then, Caesar tried it and found that although the transparent glass that separated him looked fragile, it was actually very strong and stable. The sharp claws collided with the cupboard with a loud sound, and the strong reaction made Caesar's muscles and bones hurt. The pain was so real that he couldn't help but wonder if he was really in a dream. He couldn't shatter it, at least not with his current strength. Before he could continue his research, the indestructible glass of the first display cabinet on Caesar's right disappeared without a sound. A trophy suddenly jumped out and floated in front of him, giving him a fright. He took 2 steps back and stared at the trophy that was as tall as an ordinary person. He then looked at the display window that was only as tall as his calf. He had no idea how big the interior of the display window was. After leaving the display window, the trophy quickly enlarged. Its shape was no different from the trophies commonly seen on Earth, but its surface was as smooth as a mirror and surprisingly good to the touch. At the front of its base, there was an inscription that seemed to have been carved by a knife and an axe. Dragon Body Gene Enhancer Type. Caesar, stared at the words for a long time. The bronze cup that represented the reward left the cabinet and came to him. Did this mean that he had received a reward? But where did this reward come from, and why hadn't it appeared before? If this was really a reward, why did he get the bronze cup that seemed to be the lowest grade? How did he get the higher grade emerald and white diamond trophies? Caesar narrowed his eyes and carefully looked at the bronze object in his claws. After guessing that this might be a reward, he didn't feel the ecstasy that he had imagined. Instead, he looked at it with a cautious attitude, thinking about where this reward came from. Soon, he made a new discovery. The bronze base seemed to sense his gaze. Under Caesar's gaze, rows of neatly written words that seemed to be arranged by a computer slowly appeared. Predator, you have begun to adapt to life in a new world. You have now taken the first step. Everything is possible. I wish you a pleasant journey. Caesar stared at these words for a long time and then fell in a deep thought. The words predator and first step gave him a lot of inspiration, allowing him to sense clues. After dozens of seconds, Caesar opened his eyes again. His vertical pupils flashed with light. I see. He understood. Before he fell asleep, he had hunted a wild tiger alone. At that time, he was unbearably hungry. Considering his future development, he had no choice but to take the risk and enter the forest. That was Caesar's first real hunting. When he fell asleep, the towering display cabinet appeared for the first time, and the bronze trophy also landed in front of him. But these things, the style seems a bit wrong. Caesar's gaze lingered between the bronze cup and the other prizes in the cabinet. Logically speaking, if these were really rewards, shouldn't they be magic from another world, divine weapons, or something like that? The Black Dream was silent, and no one answered. The trophy was as bright as a mirror, and its surface reflected his image. But Caesar keenly noticed that his posture in the reflection didn't change, but his body had undergone a great change. In the bronze cup's reflection, the scales and skin of his entire body became transparent. Caesar walked closer to see more clearly, but the bronze cup seemed to know his thoughts, and the image gradually enlarged. The reflection became more transparent, and Caesar could even see his own beating heart in the image. Bang! In the next moment, the bronze cup that was as tall as a human suddenly exploded, turning into countless tiny specks of light that gradually covered his body. Among them, there were especially many specks of light that entered his head and heart. The specks of light fought to be the first to enter. Chapter 6. Caesar was woken up by the low growls of the young dragons. The 2 little fellows were bored out of their minds. Other than sleeping, eating, and sleeping all day long, fighting with each other was one of the few pleasures they had. The growth and development of the young dragons was quite rapid. Including Caesar, the 3 young dragons were now about the size of an adult tiger. According to the standards of carnivores on Earth, they were already quite large beasts. But here, in this place, a beast as large as an adult tiger was not even worth mentioning. The fish that the black dragon's mother caught were all bigger than a bison, and their strength was probably above these few young dragons. Therefore, although the 2 young dragons made a lot of noise, in the eyes of the black dragon's mother, it was really nothing to write home about. She only raised her eyelids, let out a few unclear murmurs, turned over, and went back to sleep. Caesar, who was woken up, was not angry. He seemed to have absorbed the reward, and it was estimated that he would not be able to find any clues about the deeper study of the Black Dream for a while. So he simply put it to the back of his mind for the time being. He sat up with interest and watched the battle of the two young dragons. The black dragon was still young, but its sharp claws and hard scales had already begun to take shape. He could even see their fierce appearance after many years. No matter what, this was a battle between real dragons. It was a rare sight, and it made Caesar, who was curious about the strange and bizarre world, even more interested. However, the blood-sucking mosquitoes and flies that were originally quietly creeping around, waiting for an opportunity, suffered because of this. The impact of the battle between the two real dragons on the microorganisms in the nest was disastrous. If they were not careful, they would be killed by the acid breath that came out of nowhere, turning into a pool of pus. Thousands of mosquitoes and flies began to flee, escaping from the nest and strategically retreating. A few extremely fast flies flew towards Caesar, who was closer to the entrance of the cave, but he quickly stretched out his right claw and gently pinched, catching 3 pitiful creatures. Caesar's eyes flickered, and his gaze no longer focused on the 2 fighting young dragons. The so-called Dragon Body Gene Enhancer Type 1 could not be said to have made him much different from before. However, his subconscious action just now still made him understand that the broken trophy in the Black Dream had indeed affected him. Caesar moved his right claw in front of his eyes and looked at the flies that were constantly struggling in his claw. In the past, he could not catch these extremely fast little insects. Otherwise, he would not have returned empty-handed when he was fishing in the river. Speed and control of the body have improved, but I don't know how much my strength has increased. Unfortunately, there's no instrument to accurately measure it. Although it did not immediately reach the point of being completely reborn, Caesar was already very satisfied. As the name implied, he also knew that the effect of Gene Enhancer was not immediate. It increased his own potential layer by layer and pushed his body to the limit that he could reach in the future. Caesar was the descendant of the Black Dragon. Even though he did not know much about dragons, from the knowledge that he had fused with the Black Dragon, he knew that the Black Dragon was not considered the strongest among the dragons. Among the evil dragons, the Red Dragon was ranked second to last. Red Dragon, Blue Dragon, Green Dragon, Black Dragon, and White Dragon were all at the bottom, not to mention the Metal Dragon, which was even more amazing than the Black Dragon. What was worse was that although he had the true name of a dragon, he was not strictly speaking a real dragon. He could not awaken his talent and magic ability. Therefore, Caesar had always been worried that he would fight to the death. Even if he tried his best to squeeze out every cell in his body and squeeze out all his potential, he would still be limited by his dragon species and talent. In the whole world, he was just a salted fish. Fortunately, Caesar also had the Black Dream with him. That mysterious reward gave him enough confidence. "Hey, Ordorunso, you brat. Don't you want to fight with Blakesia?" The one who spoke was Garen Nephidisius Tangerine, his younger brother in the dragon sense. At this time, this guy was using his hind legs to support his body and stood up like an upright ape. He did not avoid the big swaying bird under his crotch and stood in front of Caesar casually. Dragons had no sense of shame in this aspect. You haven't beaten her before." Caesar turned his head and avoided the thing that was about to hit his face. He turned his head and looked at his sister. Not far away, the little female dragon Irene Blakesia was on all fours on the ground, staring at him with an unfriendly expression with her round eyes. Obviously, the little female dragon was still thinking about the time when Caesar secretly ate her eggshell. So vengeful. Caesar muttered a few words. The Black Dragon had a violent temper and would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. He had seen the standard template in the little female dragon. Interestingly, among the 3 dragon whelps, the one who developed the fastest and the best was actually the little female dragon Blakesia. The male dragon Garen, who had also awakened magical abilities, was never her opponent and had always been suppressed. Umph. The little female dragon flapped her wings and let out 2 rather provocative growls at her brother. The play of dragon whelps, A contest? Caesar thought for a while and took a deep breath on the spot. He stood up and stretched his limbs. Come on. He wanted to try and see how effective the dragon body gene enhancer was. However, boom. Useless and foolish black dragon. The great Sylvia has graced us with her presence. Get out of your lair. A voice came from above the dome, and a substantial draconic aura swept through the swamp. Under Caesar's astonished gaze, a gigantic dragon with emerald green scales descended from the sky. Its aura was filled with awe, and the hurricane that was stirred up by the flapping of its wings almost overturned the young dragons. Its body was thick and strong, and every part of its body was filled with muscles. Its sharp teeth were snow-white and huge, protruding out of its mouth. There was a sharp horn on its nose above its huge mouth that shone with a metallic luster. Green dragon. The three dragon whelps shouted in unison. The jungle and swamp were not exclusive to the black dragon. They were also the green dragon's favorite nesting place. Conflicts due to territorial issues were not uncommon in the stories of colossal dragons. Roar. This time, the black dragon's mother, who was crawling in the swamp, had finally awakened completely. She let out an angry growl and broke free from the quagmire, bringing a large amount of mud with her as she soared into the sky. How dare you trespass into my territory? Sylvia, do you want a war? This was the first time Caesar heard his dragon mother speak. Her voice accurately matched the black dragon's setting, hoarse and irritable. As the black dragon roared, ooze monsters crawled out of the swamp one after another, brandishing their weapons. Some of the cave entrances that Caesar usually did not notice were also filled with dog-headed cavemen. Every adult dragon had more or less dependents. These guys lived under the dragon's wings and would become their master's henchmen and fighters when necessary. However, in the face of the huge green dragon, most of these humanoid creatures cowered in fear and did not dare to move forward. This was a green dragon in its prime who had lived for almost 400 years and had its own name. It was even stronger than their master. Although the dog-headed cavemen were not very intelligent, they did not want to die in vain. Moreover, the green dragon was not without help. On the opposite side of the lake, the ogres surged forward and covered the entire swamp. It seemed that there was at least a medium-sized tribe. Huh, your territory? Green Capital Jade Sylvia let out a mocking laugh. I forgot to inform you that your nest has been expropriated. From today onwards, every forest and river here belongs to me. Now, hand over your treasures, then take your crying child and scram. Otherwise, the following words were self-evident. In your dreams, the black dragon's mother roared angrily. For any giant dragon, their treasures were equivalent to their lives. No dragon would compromise at this time. The black dragon was no exception. She roared and rushed into the sky, fighting with the invaders. What should we do? The three baby dragons looked at each other and stared at each other. Chapter 7. That's not going to happen. Caesar pursed his lips. No matter how confident the other two dragon whelps were, their mother was no match for the green dragon. This green dragon was about to enter old age, while the black dragon's mother had just entered the prime of her life. They were almost an entire age apart. So what should we do next? Hide in the nest and tremble in fear? Garen and Blakesia covered their heads and looked at each other. Young dragons were like two different creatures compared to adult dragons. They were not yet mature and could not pose any threat to the green dragons. They were just like rabbits watching a fight between two beasts. They were helpless. Coincidentally, these two dragons were in the most childish period of their lives. When they were helpless, they would subconsciously make unrealistic associations. In their imagination, their mother was facing the vicious and ugly green dragon. Although she was at a disadvantage, she would never compromise. But in the end, she had to leave the treasure behind for the sake of her children. Although they had to escape, the final scene was that the black dragon's mother put on a cool face and said coldly, "Humph, I'll leave my treasure with you for now." Then, she pulled her children and spread her wings and left. That was probably it. The dragon whelps waited for their mother's return. However, Just as the two dragon whelps were watching the battle in the sky and fantasizing about it, they noticed that their elder brother in name, Caesar Ortolunso, had slipped away and did not return. Goodbye. After a short moment of thought, Caesar immediately ran away. He knew that even if he did not leave now, as time passed, the black dragon's mother would notice his abnormality and expel him. The result would be the same. Moreover, when that time came, he might even be killed by the furious black dragon's mother. So he had a plan as soon as possible. Ever since he noticed that the black dragon's mother's attitude was changing day by day, Caesar had been thinking about a plan to leave the swamp nest. Now is the best time. After a short moment of thought, he chose the opposite direction from the green dragon's attack. He entered the dark forest and left quietly. As he ran, Caesar realized that something was different. When he was catching flies, his movements were too small and the feedback from the genetic modification was not obvious. Now that he was running in the forest, he could feel it directly. His pace and rhythm had obviously sped up. The most praiseworthy thing about dragons was their powerful strength and innate magical abilities. But in contrast, in the records of human adventurers, dragons were described as slow and clumsy. However, at this time, Caesar threw away these labels. His gait was light and his rhythm was tight, completely different from the sluggishness caused by his huge weight. This black dragon cub actually ran in an extremely absurd manner, giving people the fluidity of a cheetah's gallop. Let's see how much of a difference I can make, Caesar said in his heart. The rhythm of his running suddenly increased, and the range of his movements instantly increased. The increase in speed was not obvious to the naked eye, but the feeling of movement and the speed of his limbs in the forest was incomparably real. The dragon's claws made a rustling sound in the forest that was full of humus. The wind whistled past his ears. He was just familiarizing himself with his body. Now that he was giving it his all, his speed had increased by a whole lot. Caesar was sure that if he were to hunt a forest tiger now, he would not have to expend as much effort as the last time. The physical strength of dragons was amazing. He ran until he was far away before he stopped and prepared to take a few breaths. Caesar did not have any psychological burden in abandoning the black dragon's mother and so-called brothers. The relationship between dragons was thin, not to mention that the green dragon came for the treasure. Under normal circumstances, it would not really kill the black dragon's family. Caesar sneered at the black dragon's behavior of fighting to the death with the green dragon for the treasure. Although he had inherited the dragon's hobby of loving treasure, he did not lack rationality in his bones. Survival is the truth. What's the use of treasure if you lose your life? This was Caesar's thought. In that case, he was probably the only dragon in the world who did not care about money. But this was hard to say. Who knew if there would be a few freaks among the dragon species? Putting aside the random thoughts in his mind, Caesar knew that the most important thing now was to run, and run as far as possible. It would be best if he could find a place where there were no ferocious beasts or high-level monsters and hide there for a few decades. It would not be too late for him to consider philosophical questions like the world is so big. Should I take a look? Although he didn't manage to become a true dragon, he was still a semi-finished product. The powerful body of a dragon was still inherited by Caesar. Even if he was just a black dragon, he would still have enough strength to protect himself after he reached adulthood. As long as he did not seek death silently, he would still be able to live a comfortable life in the future. Not to mention, Caesar still had the mysterious black dream in his head. Develop wretchedly, don't be reckless. During the time he was running, Caesar had already made a simple plan for his life in the future. But reality was not always what one wanted. So when he inadvertently turned around, he saw his brothers, Garin and Blakesia, flapping their wings and chasing after him. What's the situation? You can't escape. Before Caesar could ask, his sister Blakesia had already said with a cold smile. At the same time, she was flapping her wings hard to catch up with the dragon whelp in front of her. That green dragon is evil and powerful. Without mother's restraint, I can guarantee that she has 10,000 ways to deal with you. Caesar's face was full of disdain. He could not help but express his worry for the future of the dragon race. At the same time, he looked at his sister with a caring and retarded gaze. Adult giant dragons were generally lazy. This could be seen from the fact that the black dragon's mother did not even care about her own child. That green dragon was here for the treasure. She would not play such a ruthless game if she had nothing better to do. Forming a death grudge with another dragon was not in line with the nature of the green dragon, which placed benefits above all. Of course, if they were silver dragons or red copper dragons who were in the opposite camp, it would be different. Dragons were not wild beasts. They were intelligent creatures. They were not the brainless villains depicted in night novels. They had their own thoughts and rules of behavior. On this point, Garen and Blakija, who had a comprehensive knowledge chain of dragons, should know more than him. So what were these two fellows thinking about all day long? Delicious maggots? Seeing that they were so stupid and cute, Caesar reluctantly gave the two dragon whelps a free lesson. After he finished speaking, Caesar lifted his feet and prepared to continue forward. So, what's the purpose of you following me? Garen and Blakija choked. Speaking of which, even they did not know the reason why they had to follow Caesar for such a long distance. When the green dragons attacked, the dragon whelps were in a daze, so they were easily influenced by others. At that time, Caesar took the initiative to take action and ran away. Garen was an idiot who did not understand the situation, so he followed Caesar's actions subconsciously. Blakija watched her two brothers leave. In a daze, she also ran after them. If there was a group of dragon whelps at that time, they would have all been led astray by Caesar and run after him. Under the effect of the herd effect, this kind of situation was completely possible in theory. Reality had already confirmed half of it. Is it too late for us to go back now? I'm afraid not. Mother should have already left. Blakija's face was sad and her nose was puffy. After knowing that Caesar was just running, her impression of him became even worse. Chapter 8. After a series of twists and turns, Caesar still chose to leave with the two dragon whelps. It was not because of any emotional drive, but simply because he wanted to get two helpers for himself after weighing the pros and cons. The road ahead was bleak, and a newborn dragon, whelps were in a dangerous situation. The forest was full of murderous intent, and although the formation of a small group made them a bigger target, it also increased the combat power of the three little ones, just like a pack of wolves. In this place, strength was the only guarantee for survival. Moreover, Garen and Blakija were not burdens. They were real dragons. Together with Caesar, who had undergone genetic modification, even though the three black dragons were still in their infancy, normal creatures were no match for them. However, if they did not get along well, Caesar was not willing to compromise. After settling down, he would find a chance to leave. There was no need to make things difficult for himself, just for a moment. He believed that the other two dragon whelps had the same thought. What Caesar could not understand was, why would the green dragon suddenly invade the black dragon's swamp lair? Logically speaking, the black dragon's mother had long passed the age of irresponsibly laying eggs. During pregnancy, she would only build a nest and lay eggs after confirming that there were no creatures nearby that could threaten her. Where did the green dragon come from? Why did the black dragon not know of its existence? After escaping a few miles from the swamp lair, Caesar finally understood. The greed for treasure was just a spur of the moment, and the real reason why the green dragon traveled such a long distance was because of this damned climate. It was now the dry season, and the temperature was constantly rising. The scorching sun of the other world was especially vicious, and the river was rapidly drying up. The water source disappeared, leaving behind a large area of cracked mud. The temperate rainforest gradually turned into a hilly grassland with withered trees. In order to find a suitable environment, the green dragon had no choice but to migrate. Therefore, the black dragon's damp and dark swamp lair became its target. The two dragon whelps hissed uneasily. They had a natural aversion to drought, and the temperature here was more than 40 degrees Celsius. Although it was not a specific threat to dragons, it still made them uncomfortable. However, they had to endure it. They could not go back, and that damn place was already occupied by the green dragon. The extremely territorial evil dragon could not tolerate the existence of foreign dragon whelps. The dragon whelps encountered their first problem after leaving the black dragon's mother. "Orderonso, what do we do next?" asked Garen while fiddling with the toy he just got, a black-backed beetle. Upon hearing this, Blakesia subconsciously looked at Caesar. Although she had a bad impression of this big brother who secretly ate the eggshells and ran away alone, she could tell that Caesar's thoughts and actions were much more mature than the two young dragons. Speaking of which, among the three dragon whelps, Caesar, who had yet to awaken his innate talent, had the temperament of their mother. When he was serious, he had a kind of quiet power, which made them subconsciously have a certain amount of expectations for him. "Call me Caesar," said Caesar. In fact, in the naming convention of dragons, words like Caesar, Garen, and Irene were more like symbols, while Orderonso, Nephidisius, and Blathea were their real names. However, he had a clear prejudice against long names. He preferred other people or dragons to call him Caesar instead of his real name. "All right, Caesar, what should we do next?" Blathea changed her words. She did not want to waste time on how to address him, so she waited for him to decide. First of all, the outside world is very dangerous. It's not like the fishing game from before. Since we've decided to stick together, we must be responsible for each other's actions. "No mistakes can be made," said Caesar seriously. However, it was difficult for a dragon whelp to put on a serious face. His head was very big. When he was serious, his whole face looked chubby, which was rather cute. However, Garen and Blathea still nodded. They knew better than Caesar how difficult it was for dragon whelps to survive in the wild without the protection of their parents. The highest rate of dragon whelps dying prematurely was at the dragon whelps and young dragon stage. The former was because they were weak, while the latter was because they were reckless. This was also the reason why they chose to follow Caesar. In fact, most of the dragon whelps would make this choice at this stage. Although living in a group could not increase their combat power by leaps and bounds, at least there was more protection between them. "Very good," Caesar responded. He used his claws to dig at the soil, wrinkled the skin on his brow bone — dragons had no eyebrows — and wrote the word water on the sand in dragon language. Dragons were indeed magical creatures. However, no matter how strong they were, they could not escape from the most basic physiological needs: water and food. Caesar, who had undergone genetic modification, did not feel it. However, the other two dragon whelps were obviously feeling thirsty. If even the strong, true dragon was like this, other creatures would probably be even more thirsty. Under such circumstances, they could not help but gather at the water source. During the dry season, in the barren hills, finding a water source meant finding food. Understood. Garen nodded. Their first consideration was to build a nest. Similarly, they could not avoid the problem of water. When they reached a consensus, Garen immediately spat out a mouthful of acid. After corroding the black-backed beetle, he threw it into his mouth and flew into the sky to search for traces of rivers and lakes. Blathea also flapped her wings and followed behind Garen. She was ready to join the search, but she was pulled back by Caesar. There are not many blind spots in this place. Searching together won't be of much use. Wait for it to come down, and I'll take your place. Just as Caesar had expected, the originally lush forest was gradually withering. Large patches of trees were withering, and the river that had once nurtured countless creatures was now only a dry riverbed that stretched for hundreds of miles as far as the eye could see. Fortunately, after searching for almost half a day, they finally found a lake. Although it was called a lake, it was actually just a slightly larger puddle. These were not oases, but shallow drinking troughs in the vast wilderness. However, this was enough to make the young dragons overjoyed. This pool of water was enough for the dragon whelps to live in daily. Caesar was right. Now that it was the peak of the dry season, the thirst to quench their thirst would attract an endless stream of animals. There were many creatures wandering around the pool. As long as they could stand here, they would not be lacking in meat throughout the dry season. Although they preferred fish and aquatic creatures, at this time, In order to survive, the two dragon whelps had no choice but to endure. Oh, the dragon whelps cheered one another. They could not wait to rush into the trough and drink to quench their thirst. They rolled around in the quagmire and let the mud cover their bodies. However, Caesar's expression was slightly solemn. This place did not belong to them yet. Where there were prey, there would be predators. His vision was better than the other dragon whelps. He could clearly see that there were large crocodiles bobbing up and down in the water. There were also traces of thorny-tailed lions and terror wolves in the wild. They came too late. Giant crocodiles, thorny-tailed lions, terror wolves, hyenas, leopards, and others had already occupied this land. The feast was full. There was always another mouth waiting to be fed, waiting to fight for every drop of blood. There was no need for an adult black dragon. Even if a young dragon arrived, these fellows could only run away with their tails between their legs. However, Caesar was not. The three of them were just newborn dragon whelps. Although the other predators could feel the threat, they were still wandering around, unwilling to leave this rich land of food. Chapter 9. The dragon whelps roared excitedly and rushed to the pool of water impatiently. They rolled around in the quagmire and ignored the hostile or fearful gazes of the other predators. They had no reason to be afraid. When the black dragon's mother was still around, these predators and even the more powerful ferocious species were merely their food. How could a lion be afraid of livestock? There was only contempt in Garen's and Blakesia's eyes. However, they had forgotten a very important point. Putting aside the bloodline and identity, a dragon whelp's true combat power was actually not much stronger than these strong predators. Fortunately, Caesar had remembered. Moreover, looking at the various predators that were gradually approaching the dragon whelps, Caesar was sure that these fellows had remembered as well. Do not underestimate these inferior creatures. They were very smart. After discovering the threat of the dragon whelps, the animals had reached a consensus and formed an alliance with each other through eye contact. In the natural world, when a number of predators exceeded the number of food, the predators would either starve to death or continuously eliminate the weak until the balance was restored. It was obvious that the number of predators in this pool of water was close to saturation and could no longer accept other carnivorous creatures. In this area, no animal was a match for the three dragon whelps alone. If they did not want to be eliminated, they could only work together to deal with the black dragon whelps. In order to survive, they had to kill the three dragon whelps. Even if they could not, they had to expel the dragon whelps and chase away the new competitors. This is a little troublesome. Caesar had a slight headache. Garen and Blakesia were too domineering. They occupied the most central position of the pool of water as soon as they arrived and provoked the dissatisfaction of the other predators to the greatest extent, resulting in the worst outcome. They were true dragons. However, at this age, the black dragon might not necessarily be a match for such a large group of predators. A fight was inevitable. However, although he was slightly dissatisfied with the two dragon whelps' impudence, Caesar did not really blame his younger siblings. After all, thirst was an uncontrollable nature of the black dragon. It was as normal as the need to eat and poop. Even he had the urge to rush into the pool of water unconsciously. However, he could suppress this emotion. What really infuriated Caesar was the slow reaction of the two dragon whelps. The other predators had already formed an encirclement and revealed their murderous intent. However, Garen and Blakesia were still playing with the mud and fiddling with it. They were completely unprepared. I'm guessing that you must have awakened a new dragon-type talent. You don't have to care about these carnivores at all. Caesar was a little cunning. He suddenly decided not to remind them. The jungle was not a game. The two dragon whelps had to be taught a painful lesson. Fortunately, dragons had thick skin and were extremely resistant to beatings. Even if they were surrounded, there wouldn't be any problems for a short period of time. Caesar thought as he crouched down on the hill, full of malice. He quietly observed the changes. His eyes wandered between the maned lion and the terror wolf. These creatures that obviously did not exist in his memory made him feel a little uneasy. The terror wolf leader was several times larger than the other male wolves and there was an exaggerated scar at the bottom of its neck. It was a scar left behind from a fight with other predators. Although it had already healed, the deformed wound was still shocking to look at. Its fur was exuberant and stood upright like steel needles. It was pacing horizontally. Although this terror wolf was wary of the black dragon whelps, it was not afraid. It looked at Garen and Blakesia with its vertical eyes. Its bright yellow irises blinked, and a suppressed low growl came from its throat. Behind it was the terror wolf pack. The two maned lions swayed their scorpion-like tails and approached slowly. One of them opened its mouth and yawned silently, revealing its sharp fangs with minced meat. Caesar could even smell the stench of blood that came with the wind. Without the expected roar, the maned lion pounced forward directly and launched an attack without any warning. It completed the extreme change from silence to movement and charged directly at the two dragon whelps. The next moment, the terror wolf pack began to run as well. They jumped into the swamp one after another, making splashing sounds as they surrounded and hunted the dragon whelps from another direction. Whether it was the maned lion, the terror wolf, or the hyenas and cheetahs waiting for an opportunity, they were all very quiet and maintained their silence. The first roar in the entire process was actually the black dragon. Roar! Damn it, you daring fellows! Blakesia roared in the common language. The two dragon whelps finally realized that something was wrong. These inferior races actually dared to bare their claws and fangs at the dragons. The two dragon whelps approached each other and roared at the top of their lungs. They were using the ferocious aura ability. However, the dragon whelp's draconic aura was too thin and could not intimidate the similarly ferocious large predatory creatures. Caesar, who was lying on top of the ravine and watching, wanted to cover his face. The two dragon whelps still did not understand the situation. They did not want to break out of the encirclement, but they were still roaring and threatening. In this land of savagery, without power, even if the gods from the heavenly realm came, they would be torn apart by these animals who relied on their instincts to act, let alone the dragons. It looked like they were bound to receive a solid beating. If they did not suffer some injuries and lose a few scales, they would not learn their lesson. The dragon whelps were surrounded. Fortunately, they were not retreating in defeat like Caesar had imagined. Although they had been ambushed and hit by the mucus spurted out by the manticore's tail at the very first moment, causing them to lose their ability to fly, the young dragons were still able to fight back and forth with their opponents with their sharp claws and solid scales, as well as the ferocious, cruel, and vicious nature that belonged to the black dragon. However, there were too many opponents. Just the manticore and terror wolf were already difficult to deal with, not to mention the hyenas and leopards surrounding them and attacking them from time to time. As time passed, the dragon whelps who had lost their ability to fly would be exhausted to death sooner or later. In addition to the usual methods, there's also that tail. It looks quite sharp, and there's a fatal risk of being stabbed. Caesar muttered as he watched the battlefield. He was not purely watching the dragon whelps get beaten up. In fact, his brain was also rapidly analyzing, thinking about the attack patterns and strength of the creatures he had never seen before. For example, the manticore and terror wolf, which were unique to this world, had already broken away from the level of ordinary beasts. They had barely reached the level of ferocious and violent species. Orderenso, Garen slapped the terror wolf that was biting his tail to the ground. He roared loudly, calling for backup. Don't they use magic to fly? They're still restricted by the mucus. If that's the case, the manticore's mucus has the ability to block the transmission of magic to a certain extent. Caesar noted down his own deductions and turned his gaze towards the terror wolf pack. Their attacks are orderly, and the division of labor is reasonable. There's an obvious social structure, and the alpha wolf's intelligence seems to be quite high. Caesar. Blakesia was flipped over by the agile manticore and screamed shrilly. The hyenas and leopards' physiques are similar to those on Earth. They don't show any extraordinary powers, so they probably won't pose much of a threat to the dragon whelps. No wonder they're all hiding at the back. Caesar turned a deaf ear to her and continued to observe the battlefield. He sorted through the information he had obtained once again, and after confirming that there were no mistakes, he muttered softly, "Call Daddy, and I'll come help you." He flapped his dragon wings lightly and ran nimbly. After a few steps, he began to gradually increase his speed. Finally, he reached his limit and crashed into the wolf pack. Bang, bang, bang. This was a black dragon that had undergone genetic modification. His strength far exceeded that of his brothers. Caesar was like a heavy tank that crashed into the wolf pack with a howl. He only stopped when he overturned the fourth terror wolf. "Kill the alpha wolf first." Caesar roared and pushed away the beast's corpse that was already badly mutilated and stuck to him. He increased his speed again and rushed towards the terror wolf alpha that was heavily protected. Chapter 10. Caesar's understanding of both the maned lions and the terror wolves was very limited, so he was unable to find their fatal weakness and launch a targeted attack. But there was one thing he knew. The terror wolves, as an animal species with a social structure, were clearly acting according to their leader's orders. It could be seen that the alpha wolf's role in the terror wolf pack was like the CPU of a computer. Once this part was completely destroyed, the wolf pack would inevitably fall into a state of paralysis, and it would be impossible for them to form an effective offensive formation in a short period of time. Although he didn't know if killing the alpha wolf would successfully force the wolf pack to retreat or even cause the terror wolves to collectively go berserk, Caesar was very clear that killing a group of headless flies was much easier than dealing with a group of orderly soldiers. So he made a decision in a flash: temporarily avoid the thick-skinned maned lions and kill the terror wolf leader first. Awoo! The terror wolf king also saw the new black dragon cub the moment Caesar charged into the wolf pack. Soon, the clever alpha wolf realized his intentions and raised its head to let out a long howl, ordering the wolf pack to gather with it as the center. Caesar, who was advancing, was very suspicious of the terror wolf's sensitivity to pain because the male wolf in front of him was completely unafraid of death. Even if its waist and abdomen were torn apart and its bones were broken, its attack wouldn't stop in the slightest. These guys would only stop when their necks were twisted and they were completely dead. This appearance made Caesar involuntarily think of the zombie dogs in the movies of his previous life. His heart sank as he became even more determined to kill the alpha wolf as soon as possible. Fortunately, his stupid brothers finally came to their senses at this moment and understood Caesar's intentions. They immediately shook off the maned lions that were constantly pestering them and ran towards the inner circle of the wolf pack. The alpha wolf paced back and forth. It could clearly see that Caesar was different from the other two black dragon cubs. This cub scales at a hardness that didn't match his age, and his strength and speed were also stronger. Ordinary terror wolves couldn't bite his scales and could only rely on their advantage in numbers to continuously exhaust his stamina. This couldn't go on. It couldn't allow the three cubs to converge. That would cause the wolf pack to fall into an absolute disadvantage and put itself in danger. Awoo! The alpha wolf gave another order to mobilize the pack. The wolf pack moved quickly. Caesar, who was in the midst of battle, suddenly felt the pressure lessen. He could not help but raise his head to look. He realized that there were no more male wolves in front of him. All the terror wolves had been transferred to kill Garin and Blakesia, who had come to support them. Only the alpha wolf with a huge scar on its neck was left in front of him, looking at him coldly. Puff, puff. At this moment, Caesar sensed the slight vibrations in the water. His long and narrow ears twitched, and he immediately knew that two maned lions were rushing towards him. The alpha wolf had its eyes on Caesar. It wanted to entangle him and wait for the spike-tailed lion to arrive so that they could kill the strongest fledgling dragon together. What a smart wolf. Caesar knew that a creature like the terror wolf that was incapable of magic could only be considered a predator at the bottom of the pyramid in this world. However, its unique survival wisdom was amazing. At this moment, the alpha wolf's judgment in the face of danger was not inferior to that of a human. All right, let's duel. Caesar clenched his teeth and sized up the terror wolf leader in front of him carefully. Its forelimbs were thick and short, and its muscles were bulging. This kind of body size caused this type of wolf to not run very quickly, but its strength was much stronger than other wolf species. It might even be comparable to a male lion. The alpha wolf's inverted triangular head was slightly larger than a normal terror wolf. The protrusion on its lower jaw was even more prominent, showing its powerful bite force. The standing fur all over its body showed that it was ready to pounce at any time. With the spike-tailed lion's speed, it would probably join the battle in less than 15 seconds. Time was of the essence, and Caesar's mind was quickly calculating the attack route. In this world where the strong preyed on the weak, any mistake was fatal. He only had one chance. Once the attack failed and the spike-tailed lion joined the battle, the situation would be reversed. At that time, the exhausted fledgling dragons would no longer have a chance to turn things around. They could only give up on this lake, leave with their tails between their legs, and look for another place. Come! A black shadow suddenly scuttled across the calm surface of the lake. After Caesar passed by, the lake water began to churn. He used all his strength and rushed in front of the alpha wolf before the normal terror wolves could react. At this moment, he roared and used his genetically modified body to forcefully twist the inertia, chasing after the terror wolf that subconsciously dodged to the side. His forelimbs flashed with a cold light as his sharp claws slashed across its neck. Caesar felt that he had used up all the strength in his body after this series of actions. Even so, he had no choice but to run again to increase the distance between them. This was because the spike-tailed lion had already arrived behind him, and the green mucus had almost hit his body. Turning around, the terror wolf leader's resounding roar almost caused the pack of wolves to go berserk. However, it was only a few roars before the intelligent alpha wolf staggered back a few steps and fell down with a bang. Blood gushed out from its neck like a spring. A real hunt in the animal world would never be like what Caesar had seen on television in his previous life. It was accompanied by strong drumming music and slowed down countless times, where life and death were decided amidst flying splashes and smoke. A real hunt only took an instant. 3 seconds was the distance between life and death for the terror wolf leader. When Caesar rushed up, the alpha wolf had already tried its best to dodge and counterattack, but the dragonling's breaking ability simply defied common sense. Caesar stopped abruptly, twisted his body, and adjusted the direction of his attack. His sharp claws finally pierced into the alpha wolf's fur and skin, tearing apart its carotid artery. Success! Caesar looked at the terror wolf leader that had fallen to the ground with a loud crash. He took a deep breath and let out his loudest roar at the other predators in the lake. The ear-piercing sound that sounded like metal rubbing against each other spread to the hills. This was the first time he had made such a sound. Roar! Now was the time to demonstrate. Hearing Caesar's roar, Garin and Blakesia stood up and roared as well. For a moment, high-frequency dragon roars rose and fell, echoing in the lake. The remaining terror wolves cowered and let out dejected whimpers. Their defeat was certain. They did not look at the corpse of their dead leader. Their tails drooped as they jogged away from the lake and walked towards the hills. The 2 main lions let out threatening growls, but were immediately roared back by the dragonlings. They knew that although these dragonlings could not kill them in a short time, it would be difficult for them to defeat the 3 dragonlings after losing their helpers. The main lions slowly retreated, giving up the ownership of this territory. The other hyenas and leopards scattered like birds and beasts. This place is ours. Caesar opened his mouth and took 2 breaths. His nose let out a muffled snort. Then he bit the terror wolf leader's body and swallowed it in large mouthfuls. Chapter 11. Caesar paid special attention to the fatal wound on the terror wolf leader. The penetrating wound caused by the sharp claws on its neck had caused its entire neck to be badly mutilated. It looked like it had been cut by a blade and was almost completely severed. The damage caused by such a horrifying wound was definitely fatal. It was no wonder that the terror wolf leader died on the spot. Even a dragon with a strong life force would find it difficult to survive after suffering such an injury. The feast had begun. Although the herbivores had long fled in fear from this chaotic battle, the wolf pack that had suffered heavy losses still left behind many corpses. The dragon whelps, who were about to faint from hunger, naturally did not reject any of them and ate in large mouthfuls. Compared to Caesar's unscrupulous nature, Garin and Blakesia were much more reserved. They always used acid to corrode the food before swallowing it into their stomachs. In the sky, the bloodhawk vultures let out unpleasant cries that were even more ear-piercing than crows. They circled above the lake and stared at the terror wolf corpses with greedy eyes. Roar, roar. Blakesia hugged the half-eaten food and let out two threatening roars towards the sky. Even if they could not eat anymore, they had to protect the food. In this dry season, where natural resources were scarce, every bit of meat was precious. Therefore, she was working together with Garin, dragging the terror wolf corpses into the water trough and burying them in the dirty quagmire. Black dragons were scavengers, and these wolf corpses would allow them to avoid hunting for a long time. Oh, Orderonso, it's all thanks to you this time. Although Caesar had emphasized it before, Garin could not change his words immediately. This guy chewed on the meat in his mouth and followed behind him in a muffled voice, apologizing in a muffled voice. Caesar's appetite was larger than theirs, so he was still processing the terror wolf in front of him and replied with a muffled voice. Dragons had always had a strong sense of self-esteem. Even if they knew that they had made a mistake, they would rarely admit it. Garin's muffled apology was definitely sincere in the eyes of the dragons. He was probably deeply aware of his mistake. Caesar had an adult soul that did not match his appearance. Naturally, he did not have the low-class interest of rubbing salt in someone's wound. He did not force the issue. However, this scene made Blakesia unhappy. She had always liked to bully and tease Garin, but when she saw Garin sincerely submitting to Caesar and apologizing silently, she felt as if something had been taken away from her. She was extremely jealous. However, she also realized that she had made a mistake earlier. It was hard for her to find a reason to flare up, so she could only vent her anger on the mud in front of her and tear the wolf's corpse into pieces. The sky gradually darkened, and the dragon whelps began to set up their first territory. They had already taken care of their stomachs and needed to prepare for survival, hunting, meditation, and deep sleep. At least until now, Caesar had yet to discover any traces of monsters or ferocious species, so it seemed like this place was safer than the edge of the forest. After chasing away the carnivorous beasts nearby, the little dragons did not have to worry too much. With the help of the two dragon whelps, Caesar spent some time to open up a groove at the bottom of the not-so-deep pool. Then, he flattened the surroundings slightly and expanded it into a U-shaped underwater cave that was not considered small. This was not enough. The dragon whelp's attitude toward the nest that was related to their lives was absolutely strict. To be on the safe side, they continued to work and diligently dug out more than one exit at the bottom of the U-shaped nest so that they could escape quickly in the future when they encountered a critical situation. The pitch-black cave was far worse than the swamp nest. However, the black dragon whelps were not picky. They only needed a place to hide. It would be best if it could accommodate their love of mud and mud. Caesar once again came to that strange and unpredictable space in his sleep. The display cabinet that towered into the darkness was still standing there silently. It was as monotonous, dry, cold, and dead as always. He waited with anticipation for a long time, but he did not see any new trophies appear. What's going on? Caesar hesitated. According to his speculation, if his life was compared to a game, then the trophies should be equivalent to leveling up rewards in the game. It did not make sense that the experience gained from such a great battle was not enough for him to complete a second leveling up. Unless his speculation was wrong, Caesar, who had waited for a long time, simply sat down in front of the display cabinet. He stared at the endless darkness in the distance and thought hard. Killing could not make him stronger. If the rewards were not purely from killing monsters to level up, then What other ways could he gain benefits? The Black Dream was the root of his current foothold. Of course, he wanted to understand the rules. Predators, first time, anything is possible, trophies, the scene of him obtaining the bronze cup repeatedly appeared in Caesar's mind. He carefully sorted out every detail, unwilling to let go of any mistakes. Trophies, 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 time continued to pass. I understand now. Caesar suddenly understood. He shook his head, wagged his tail, and stood up again. If his experience in the other world was compared to a game, other than leveling up and training, what other ways could he gain rewards? Combined with the unique way the rewards were presented, Caesar could only think of one possibility: achievements. The reason he received the reward for killing the wild tiger was not because he gained experience and leveled up, but because he completed the predator's achievement. Everything is possible, so that's how it is. Caesar finally understood the meaning of the small line of words inscribed on the bronze base. He needed to constantly try to complete new achievements in order to exchange for more rewards. It seemed that the path that the Black Dream had arranged for him would not be too easy. Generally, without the protection of parents, less than half of the 10 hatchlings would be able to successfully grow into youth with the ability to protect themselves. After the siege, the hatchlings became more and more aware of their own weakness. Therefore, in the following period of time, other than Caesar, the glutton who often ambushed animals that drank water, the other 2 hatchlings stayed in the nest and slept as much as possible, relying on scavenging to maintain their lives. Chapter 12. Time flew by, and 7 years had passed. The dragon whelp's nest had undergone many baptisms during the dry season and the rainy season. The underwater cave had been expanded again, and the area it occupied was almost half the size of a small lake. Animals at the top of the food chain were characterized by their low reproduction rate and long reproduction cycle. Therefore, even though the little dragons were already 7 years old, they had just entered the dragon whelp stage. As time went by, the bodies of the dragon whelps became stronger and stronger. Some of the inherited memories were also gradually becoming clearer. On Garin and Blakesia's bodies, a black brilliance that was constantly shrinking and rotating appeared around them. In the dragon whelp stage, they had awakened a second spell-like ability, corrosive halo. Under the influence of this thing, the swamp that the dragon whelps lived in was gradually corroded into smelly, dirty water. Some fish that accidentally slipped in through the gaps of the cave could not escape the terrible fate of being turned into canned herring. In such an environment, those who were slightly knowledgeable would know that the black dragon lived here and it was very dangerous. Therefore, Caesar decisively separated from them. Of course, whether it was because of the potential danger or because he could not stand the smelly environment, outsiders did not know. Garin and Blakesia, who discovered that they had awakened spell-like abilities, were quite happy at first. However, when they saw their twin brother, the 2 dragon whelps were not so happy. Compared to their brother Caesar, the little dragons could only be considered to have grown. They had only grown somewhat. It was a little awkward. Caesar's changes had completely overturned their understanding. Let's talk about body size first. Blakesia did not know how this guy grew. Caesar's body was now 7 meters long, without including his wingspan. This concept might be a little vague, but a visual description would be his younger brother and sister. The 2 dragon whelps added together would not be as big as him. Not only that, Caesar obviously did not inherit the black dragon's slender body. He was very strong, and the muscles on his limbs made him look even taller and more powerful. He was just like a red dragon with black scales. Above Tiamat, 7 meters, Blakeshia suspected that her brother was a hybrid of a red dragon, but in her memory, even a purebred red dragon of the same age did not have such a big brother. The biggest difference was the horns on Caesar's head. The black dragon generally had 2 horns that curved backward to better conduct magic, but Caesar had 4 horns on his head. 2 of them diverged backward, and the other 2 diverged upward. Unlike the hollow structure of a dragon's horn that was used to conduct magic, His horn was made of solid bone that was extremely hard and sharp. Such a structure made even his head a lethal weapon. What really made Caesar happy was that, as a dragon, he could finally fly. He had mastered the ability to fly, purely using the ascending force created by flapping his wings to fly. His wings were much bigger than Garen and the others. They were almost 3 times the size of an ordinary black dragon's. The wingspan was extremely terrifying, almost 15 meters. At first, Caesar was worried that such large wings would hinder his movements on land. However, after studying his body in depth, Caesar realized that there were 2 delicate cartilage structures in his wings that were different from those of dragons. They allowed his wings to fold like a folding bed. After 2 years of familiarization, Caesar could control the expansion and contraction of his wings skillfully. When he did not need to fly on land, his folding of his wings would not affect his movements. His appearance was no different from other dragons. This 7-meter-long black dragon was considered a decent fighter. At least Garen and Blakesia together would not be able to defeat him. Even the young red dragon, who was 1 level higher than a dragon whelp, would have to think twice before fighting him. This freak of dragons, Caesar Ordorunso, had also accomplished another feat, whether it was a Pinochet dragon, a metallic dragon, or any other legendary dragon species. Other than the Mercury dragon that would become more agile at different stages of growth, the other true dragons would find it difficult to become faster and swifter. Moreover, as they grew larger, they would only become slower and slower. However, Caesar Ordorunso had created history. This guy had displayed unparalleled speed and agility when he hunted down the Terrorwolf leader. Today, he could feel that his speed was still increasing. A black dragon that was getting faster and faster? If other people or dragons knew about this, they would probably find it unbelievable that a Pinochet black dragon could display such an ability. Even the mother of evil dragons, Tiamat, would probably find it hard to believe. However, it was hard to say. Perhaps their great mother, Tiamat, had already gotten used to it. Now, in just a few years, an extraordinary Pinochet dragon would appear. None of them believed in her, causing her to be busy fighting the red dragon and the white dragon all day long. Only the blue dragon clan could make their mother proud. A strong body that defied common sense brought about a huge consumption. Caesar's appetite was more than twice that of his younger brother, Garen. He needed an abundant amount of energy to maintain the operation of his body. Now, he had just eaten an adult spike-tail lion. He was bored to death as he hid in the mud by the shore. The thorns on his back swayed slightly with the flow of the water. The sun shone on a lake by the shore until it was warm. On the shore, a group of terror wolves were yawning as they enjoyed the sunlight. Yes, it was the group of terror wolves whose leader was killed by Caesar. During the 4th dry season, when Caesar and the others occupied this lake, this group of wolves returned to this water trough to try their luck or something. In the end, they unfortunately met Caesar, who had coincidentally woken up and was out looking for food. What happened next was natural. After paying the price of 6 male wolves, the terror wolves submitted and trembled. They naturally became Caesar's first batch of dependents. Early on, Caesar realized that his appetite was rapidly increasing. If he continued to hunt aimlessly and inefficiently, he would probably starve to death. Therefore, he needed some lackeys to act as his eyes to search for traces of various large animals and carry out targeted hunting. The intelligent terror wolves seemed to be the best choice. At his age, he couldn't even feed himself, let alone enslave a group of goblins or kobolds. Reality proved that Caesar's decision was unquestionably correct. Since then, the time he had to go hungry became less and less. As he grew day by day, his range of activity rapidly expanded. His control of the surrounding environment also constantly improved. In 7 years, this area of hills already knew that there was a violent black dragon near the lake. There weren't any high-level black dragon nearby, so the 7-meter-tall strong black dragon became the undisputed overlord of this area. Greed was his synonym, and brutality was his only title in this area. However, Caesar had already decided to leave this place. Chapter 13. First of all, this hilly area wasn't considered rich in resources. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for there to be no ferocious species or high-level monsters. Even a young dragon like Caesar could become the overlord of the lake. During the rainy season, animals had too many places to go and wouldn't want to enter the hills at all. During the dry season, the lake that would have attracted prey to drink turned into filthy, poisonous water because of the black dragon's residence. In addition to Caesar's terrifying appetite, food became harder and harder to find in this area after a big meal. The lack of food caused his range of activities to continuously expand. And the expansion of his range of activities meant danger for the black dragon at his age. This was only one of the reasons. What really made him make up his mind was that Caesar had discovered traces of human-like activity in the southern forest not long ago. To be precise, they were humans. In order to investigate and obtain accurate information, he had lost many of his terror wolves. Caesar guessed that there was a high probability that they were human adventurers attracted by the green dragon. Those guys had already gathered in the south for some time, planning and preparing to start a dragon-slaying war. He could fight very well now, and his combat power should be stronger than a young red dragon. But if he went up against people like spellcasters and berserkers, he would still be defeated. Whether it was the green dragon named Green Capital Jade, or the human adventurers, they weren't people he could afford to provoke now. The lake where the young dragons resided was located on the path that humans had to pass through to reach the green dragon's nest. They had to migrate as soon as possible. It could be seen that the terror wolves that went to the south to investigate were getting more and more restless. These little guys had a more accurate beast instinct than dragons and could smell potential danger. The terror wolves' behavior made Caesar realize that the humans were most likely ready to start a war with the green dragon at any time. If he didn't leave now, he and the two young dragons would be uncontrollably involved in this storm. Although the other two black dragon were of little help to Caesar, he did not intend to abandon them. After all, they had huddled together for such a long time, and there was still some emotional connection, even if the little dragons were asleep most of the time. After Garin and Blakesia formed the corrosive halo, Caesar rarely entered their underwater lair. This time, he came back here and informed the little dragons to prepare for migration. He also told them the specific reason why he was doing so. In fact, there was nothing much to prepare. It was just that they got the gold nugget from somewhere. God knows how the two young dragons found the gold nugget in the hilly area. The dragon species' talent for digging treasures was really amazing. The two of them could not bear to part with their first fortune. They had to think of a way to take it away. Their love for treasures was no less than their lives. Because of this, when Blakesia saw the arrival of her brothers, she was rather cautious. At this moment, there was a slight tremor in the underwater lair. While Blakesia was still packing up her treasures, Garin quietly floated to the surface of the water. He sneakily poked his little black head out of the water to observe the situation. Then, he quickly shrunk back in. A ferocious tiger, Garin whispered to Garin. Garin gestured at Caesar softly. This kind of large, violent creature was obviously a wild beast that was difficult to deal with for a dragon whelp. Its strength and speed were not on the same level. However, this did not apply to Caesar. He slowly floated to the surface, revealing his towering body. Caesar had not found any traces of ferocious creatures in this area. He did not know where this ferocious tiger came from. Perhaps it escaped from the rainforest where the green dragon lived. This large creature had a body size that far exceeded that of a normal wild tiger. It was more than 7 meters long, slightly larger than Caesar. Its forelimbs were much thicker than its hind legs. It was obviously more powerful. There were also long, narrow, and sharp teeth exposed in its mouth. In the forest, this ferocious tiger's dominance was definitely at the level of an overlord. It was no wonder that Garin became a coward the moment he saw it. Even a normal young black dragon would find it difficult to be a match for this beast. He would only have a chance when he was a teenager. The ferocious tiger immediately noticed the black dragon who had come ashore. Ferocious creatures did not have brains that were ferocious as well. They at least knew how to judge the situation. The black dragon in front of it was obviously not in the ferocious tiger's memory. It had never seen a black dragon that looked like this. The ferocious tiger was a little confused. Therefore, it moved 2 steps and let out a threatening growl. This was the way animals judged danger. If this black dragon turned and ran, it meant that it could pursue and kill him. If the black dragon did not give in and roared back, it meant that the other party was not afraid of it. It needed to further consider probing attacks or avoiding and leaving. However, what caught the ferocious tiger off guard was that the other party did not run away or roar back. Instead, without saying anything, it pounced at a speed that did not match its size. Just as the ferocious tiger was roaring, Caesar had already deduced the development of the situation in his mind. The best result would of course be to launch himself forward and then kill this big tiger with one claw. However, this was too easy to take for granted. As a ferocious beast, this giant tiger's speed far exceeded its normal relatives. Its reaction was also perfect. This giant tiger rolled and dodged Caesar's sudden attack, causing the black dragon to miss. The ferocious tiger stood up again and shook its head. Although it did not roar again, it was obvious that it was angry. Its back was raised high, and its body of more than 7 meters was completely bent, ready to fight back. The nerve reaction of felines was much faster than that of dragons. Therefore, even if Caesar had undergone genetic modification, it was difficult for him to match the speed of the ferocious tiger at this age. When he turned his body, the giant tiger had already pounced on him. It was a direct hit. After pouncing on the prey, instinct drove the ferocious tiger to use the hunting technique engraved in its heart. It used its powerful forelimbs to firmly hold Caesar's joints. It opened its mouth wide, and its sharp teeth gave it the confidence to easily bite through the black dragon's scales in front of it. However, what made the ferocious tiger's soul leave its body was that in the process of wrestling, it was actually at a disadvantage. The forelimbs that it was proud of lost strength in front of the black dragon. They were lifted up inch by inch and forcibly broken. The hard tiger claws were all broken and bleeding. For the first time, the ferocious tiger's prey broke free from its control. At the same time, after breaking free from the giant tiger, Caesar's 4 limbs borrowed strength from the ground. His tail also used strength to support his body. Then, with the greatest strength in his body, he suddenly pushed upwards. The distance between his face and his face was too close to dodge. His head was like a battering ram covered with spikes. When he made this move, the ferocious tiger howled. Its heavy body was lifted off the ground by the black dragon. The big cat's whole body rolled in the air and then fell heavily to the ground. At this time, the ferocious tiger was already breathing more than it was breathing. It was heavily injured, and there were 4 exaggerated holes in its chest. Blood dyed its yellowish fur red. Its dark yellow eyeballs trembled slightly, and it could no longer roar. In the ferocious tiger's wide, open dark pupils, a mouth opened to a 90-degree angle. The dense fangs inside were getting closer and closer to it. The outcome was decided. Caesar had bitten off the ferocious tiger's neck. Killing the ferocious tiger was not an impulse. Caesar had always been eager to fight with such a large, ferocious creature to determine his position in the food chain. He also wanted to be prepared for the future migration. Along the way, he wanted to know what he could and could not touch. Chapter 14. They rested for a while in the poplar bushes near the foothills. The little dragons drank from the mountain spring, while Caesar's terror wolves spread out in all directions to be on guard. This was the 2nd day after leaving the hilly area. The young dragons still had not found a suitable environment. The landscape of the other world was completely different from what Caesar knew. The further north they went, the hotter the weather seemed to be. Splash! Not far away, there was a weak splash of water. Soon, 2 terror wolves held the fish they had just caught in their mouths and sat down while wagging their tails. They placed the fish in front of Caesar as if they were trying to please him. Good job. Caesar was not stingy with his praise. He stretched out his claws and scratched the fur on the terror wolf's neck. Then he swallowed the small fish that was only the size of his palm. After a few years of recuperation, the wolf pack had reproduced to as many as 30. These obedient fellows knew how to please their master. Caesar was now basically raising them as pets. The journey was boring, but the little fellows gave him a lot of fun. Huh. Blakesia, who was watching coldly from the side, spat. These terror wolves were fine, but you raised them as domestic dogs. She and Caesar had always been at odds, and there was no lack of bickering between them. However, Caesar was stronger than her in everything except his magic ability. His scales were hard, his claws and teeth were sharp, and his body was incomparably strong. So what if he had magic ability? If they really fought, the two of them would not be Caesar's opponent. What made the dragon even more jealous was that Caesar, who was still in his infancy, had already subdued a group of dependents. This made the little female dragon feel even more unbalanced. She could not understand how this fellow who did not even have draconic aura managed to get 30 terror wolves. Even as a relative, Black Dragon's naked jealousy was undoubtedly revealed. However, Blakesia could not do anything about it, and could only retort from time to time. Caesar ignored her and turned his head away. Young dragons at this age were basically the same as naughty human children. The more you argued with her, the more energetic she would be. If you continued to ignore her, this fellow would naturally wilt. Blakesia was ignored. Then, she saw Garen, who was staring foolishly at the small fish while drooling. She could not help but get angry and slapped this silly fellow's head. "Let's go, you idiot. I'll bring you to find food." Caesar sighed. "If you want to go by yourself. Don't bring Garen along. Otherwise, I'll have to dig another grave." Hearing this, Blakesia's body trembled slightly, and she stopped in her tracks. "You want to hunt at night? You don't care about your own life. The night in the wilderness is far more dangerous than the day. Do you know how many creatures are nocturnal?" "Of course I know better than you." Blakesia mumbled and lay down gloomily. The danger of going out at night in an unknown region was self-evident. In her memory, many large beasts and strange monsters were active at night. A few young dragons would definitely not be able to deal with those fellows. Perhaps they would be dealt with. Saying not to go out at night was not a joke. Although Black Dragon was also a creature who liked to go out at night, Blakesia had to suppress this thought at this time. Awoo! The terror wolf's howl was loud and hurried. The young dragons stood up one by one and became alert subconsciously. The sky is sealed by magic. Something has come to us. Blakesia looked at the terror wolf that slowly retreated to her side. Her voice became hoarse, and she was somewhat uneasy. She was like a frightened cat. The gray scales all over her body stood up. She bent her waist and opened her mouth. She was about to growl like a beast at any time. "Quiet. Don't act rashly." Caesar stopped her and looked at the dark night. Those who had the power to seal the sky were definitely highly intelligent creatures. Whether they were humanoid creatures or strange monsters, they were not easy to deal with. The first thing that came into view were pairs of red eyes, and silhouettes were closing in on them from all directions. Humans. Even Garen, who was slow to react, became anxious. In their eyes, humans were creatures that were far more vicious and cunning than the evil dragons. Their level of evil was almost comparable to the abyss demons. Once a young black dragon fell into the hands of a human, it would not have a good ending. "Friends, we're just travelers passing by," Caesar whispered to the shadowy figures. He first said it in Draconic, and then repeated it in the common language. All movement stopped. Under the moonlight, Caesar glimpsed the sharpened stone luster. "The mountain is ours. The road is ours." A low, firm, and unfriendly voice came from the bushes. "You are also ours." There seemed to be a lot of them. Kidnapping? Were they human bandits? Were the sons of the great shadow dragon Nesitoria? Caesar made up a name for his mother. At this time, he had no choice but to use the name of the elders in his family. "Who are you?" "There's only one black dragon nearby, but it was banished by Sylvia 7 years ago," an even older voice said. The figure stepped out of the thicket and walked into the light. He wore a tattered robe and held a scepter made of bone. Even though he was old and had a hunched back, his body was still full of strong muscles. Green skin, a face that looked like a mix of human and pig, a sloping forehead, inverted teeth, and protruding lips. Orcs. Behind him, it was as if pieces of rocks were moving forward. Tall and big orcs appeared one after another. They were burly and strong, with animal fur around their waists. They held weapons made of stone in their hands as they walked towards the dragon, whelps with heavy footsteps. Some of these orcs had collars made of fangs, some wore heavy horn helmets, and some were naked. As they walked, they clashed the weapons in their hands. To any clan or tribe, the dragon whelps were a gift from the gods. Their bodies were small and weak, but they could be sold for a sky-high price in the human world. This generous reward could even change the awkward situation of some poor tribes. Roar, lowly orcs! Garen and Blakesia roared. There were close to 50 strong orcs, so they had no choice but to react fiercely and intimidate the other party, not allowing the orcs to come closer. The two young dragons were furious. This was a premeditated ambush. The green-skinned orcs had obviously discovered them a long time ago. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent out so many elite warriors and even invited the respected adepts of the tribe to help. Roar, kill it! The strong orc warriors obviously felt insulted and had a tendency to go berserk collectively. Kill these two little bastards, then capture the biggest one and sell it to the human world. Come on, you lowly orcs, let's see who dies first. Blakesia roared and spat out a strong, acid breath that was close to 2 meters long from her throat. She and Garen stood on the left and right of Caesar. In fact, most of the adult black dragon and green dragon's families or slaves had more or less orcs. From a dragon's point of view, what she said was actually not unreasonable. However, in this situation where the enemy was strong and they were weak, it would be foolish to provoke the enemy. This group of orcs was strong, very strong. 50 elite orc warriors and an unknown old wizard. With such ample preparation, even a young dragon would have to avoid them and run away with his tail between his legs. If they really fought, even with the genetically mutated Caesar, the 3 dragon whelps, and a group of terror wolves, they would definitely not be a match for these orcs. Caesar could clearly see that if they really fought, they would be the ones at a disadvantage. Now that the sky was sealed, it would be difficult for the dragon whelps to escape. What should they do? Skin these bastards and use their scales to make armor. I'm going to dig out the intestines of you lowly orcs and watch you die in pain. The battle was about to start. The orcs rubbed their palms and roared loudly. The dragon whelps were also stirring their throats to prepare their dragon's breath. The surrounding terror wolves all arched their backs. If this continued, it would be bad. If they fought with the orcs, it would be over. Even if Caesar could use his strong body to force a way out and escape, Garen and Blakesia would definitely be captured. They could not let this battle start. Shut up. With a loud bang, Caesar slammed his claw on the ground. The loud noise made the noisy orcs and the dragon, whelps who were constantly provoking, shut up. His strength was so great that it was shocking. The orcs with sharp eyes even saw tiny cracks appearing on the ground. After temporarily intimidating everyone, Caesar stared at the old orc who was dressed differently from the other orcs. He said in a low voice, "You want to capture us? I wonder how many orc warriors' lives are you going to pay with?" Chapter 15. Weak little fellow, I bet that your mother didn't teach you that it's best not to threaten fearless orcs. Before the old orc could answer, a low voice came from another direction. The most suitable thing for dragon babies like you is to hide under your mother's wings and tremble, even if we're just cubs. Caesar's gaze swept across the orcs' faces one by one. But we know how to run and fly. Even if only one of us 3 brothers can leave today, what will happen after a few decades? When the giant dragons come back, other than hiding behind those damned rocks and trembling, what else can you do? As he spoke, he used his hind legs to support his body and stood up with his head held high. His folded wings spread open with a bang. His wingspan of more than 15 meters was like a dark cloud, and he continued to exert psychological pressure on the orcs with his huge body. Caesar bent down and slowly approached the leader of the orcs. His huge head was almost touching the old orc's face. Their foreheads were almost touching. The pupils of dragons were vertical and filled with deterrence. Caesar and the old orc stared at each other. Words were squeezed out from the gaps of his teeth. Don't pray that time will make us forget. Don't even think that you or your children can escape. We, the Black Dragon, will pay our debts. If you have the guts to start a war today, we'll pay you back tenfold in the future. His expression was ferocious and his voice was cruel. He seemed to be full of vigor, but he actually had his own plans. He was secretly spying on the orcs' reactions. The purpose of the claw earlier was to show his power. Other than threatening, these words were also a form of probing. If the orcs were still determined to start a war with the dragon whelps and launch an attack, Caesar would have to prepare to escape immediately. No matter what, he would have to run away. Because he had already spoken to this extent, if the orcs did not take his threat seriously and were not afraid, it meant that these green-skinned fellows had the confidence to win and did not plan to let any of the dragon whelps go. If that really happened, Caesar would not be able to care about Garen and Blakesia. He would not be able to protect himself and would run away immediately. Fortunately, the worst outcome did not occur. After hearing these words, the orc warriors couldn't help but hesitate. The flames of anger were extinguished. They were the fiercest and most aggressive orcs, but as intelligent creatures who wouldn't plan for the future. They only wanted to make a fortune by kidnapping these 3 dragon whelps and selling them to the human world for a large sum of money. However, could he guarantee that he would be able to capture every single dragon whelp? Even the biggest one can catch it? The orc warriors hesitated. They looked at their leader, the elderly orc wizard, and waited for his orders. Besides, if you really kill us, what will you get? Caesar's voice turned gentle, as if he were a devil's persuasion. Your purpose is nothing more than to capture us and sell us to human beings in exchange for a generous reward. But how can you guarantee that we won't be able to break free from the abyss of hell? Once we successfully break free from the humans' control, who should we look for to settle the score? Another bombshell. Caesar was not confident to the extent that he could make the enemy surrender directly with a shake of his dragon body. However, he knew that the actions of any intelligent creature had a purpose behind them. The reason why the orcs besieged them was because they were driven by benefits. However, if they realized that the losses they were going to suffer were far greater than the benefits, what would these orcs do? In order to completely change their minds and prevent these orcs from being blinded by their anger and impulsiveness, Caesar even fabricated some benefits for these guys. Besides, compared to the friendship of the giant dragons, how much is the mere reward of the humans worth? After Caesar finished speaking, the scene immediately fell into a strange silence. Blakesia and Garen stared at him blankly. It was hard for them to imagine that their brother would say such words. In the eyes of the dragon whelps, the orcs had already rushed in front of them. A fight to the death was inevitable. The orc warriors were also silent. They looked at each other, and only after a long time did they start whispering. The friendship of the giant dragons? Does an evil dragon, like the Black Dragon, have any friendship to speak of? Duoga doesn't know. Duoga just doesn't want to fight with the adult Black Dragon in the future. Oh, that's too scary. The Black Dragon's words can't be trusted. The tribe has been deceived by these cunning, evil dragons before. We can't just let them go like this. Caesar's goal was achieved. These green-skinned orcs looked strong, but they were not stupid. At least they could understand the meaning behind his words. Now, there were different opinions in this tribe. Now, it was up to their leader. This old orc who was frowning all the time seemed to be a little difficult to deal with. However, Caesar was not worried. Since they did not attack before, the old leader would not order the Black Dragon to be killed in the face of the orc warriors who no longer had the will to fight after his persuasion. However, for some reason, this old man kept silent. No one knew what he was thinking. Time passed silently in the stalemate. After waiting for a long time until dawn, when even Caesar was feeling impatient, The old orc raised his head and squeezed out a wrinkled smile on his face. "You've succeeded. You've convinced me." The old man's voice was very hoarse, like the bark of a dead tree. Caesar's tense nerves finally relaxed a little. "Looks like this isn't a beautiful misunderstanding. However, it's fortunate that this can be the beginning of our friendship." At this time, he sharply noticed that Garen and Blakesia did not look too good. The two dragon whelps' movements were very big, as if they had something to say in their hearts with resentment. However, now was not the time to discuss the emotions of the dragon whelps. He probed the orc leader and said, "My friend, this chance encounter left a deep impression. However, as I mentioned before, we're just travelers passing by. It's getting late now. Can we set off again?" "No." The old orc answered quickly this time. He rejected lightly. The atmosphere in the forest turned into a boiling pot of oil again. Blakesia and Garen immediately arched their backs and prepared a fight to the death. Their reaction was so fast that even Caesar felt embarrassed. "It's not that I don't trust you." However, the honest and sincere orc warriors were once deceived by the evil dragon. For this, the tribe paid a high price. "I have to ensure that this kind of thing will not happen again." The old sorcerer who held a high position in the orc tribe bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture to Caesar. "Please let me see your sincerity. Together with me, under the witness of the God of truth, we can establish a true friendship." So this was what he was waiting for. Caesar finally understood what the old orc was thinking after standing there for half a night. This old man had actually drafted a treaty and requested to sign it together with Caesar under the witness of the God of truth. Caesar listened to the conditions of the orc leader. If he were to summarize the other party's request in his own words, it would be, after the treaty was established, the little dragons would not harm the Stone Crow clan in any way. At the same time, both parties of the treaty would not harm the interests of the other party in any way. In times of crisis, the Black Dragon had the obligation to provide protection and help to the Stone Crow clan. This was a blatantly unfair treaty. This damned old man. As an orc, he had fallen to the same level as a human. He was cunning and greedy. Caesar cursed in his heart. He then argued with reason. They were not helpless fish and had no reason to accept such an unfair treaty. The two creatures that were even different species started a bargain in the forest. The true dragon and the orc leader lost their dignity. The scene was unbearable to look at. In the end, the treaty they came up with was as follows. The three sons would not harm the Stone Crow clan in any way. Both parties would respect each other and would not harm the interests of the other party. The Stone Crow clan would provide protection to Caesar or to Runzo Targaryen for 25 years. During this period, they would ensure that Caesar's physical needs, such as food and sleep, were met. When Caesar reached adulthood, he must return and provide protection and help to the Stone Crow clan for 30 years. In fact, Caesar was quite satisfied with the final agreement. It would be best if he could be protected during his weak childhood and adolescence. He did not feel that it was shameful to be protected by the orcs. To Caesar, before he truly grew up, survival was everything. Hiding was the only way to go about it. He was not afraid that the Stone Crow clan would cheat him because they had added a clause in the treaty. If the Stone Crow clan could not provide protection for 25 years no matter the reason, the treaty would be void and Caesar would not have to fulfill the treaty. When he was satisfied, he wanted to add the names of the two dragon whelps into the covenant as well. However, these two fellows shook their heads like a rattle drum and refused to sign their true dragon names no matter what he said. Caesar had no reason to force them. Both parties signed their names under the witness of the God of truth, and the treaty came into effect. Chapter 16. After the alliance was established, the old wizard brought the elite orcs and retreated, creating a distance between them and the dragon whelps. Before he left, he even gave Caesar a meaningful smile. "You're crazy." Previously, with the enemy at their side, Blakesia and Garen had no choice but to suppress their emotions and obey Caesar's arrangements. The dragon whelps would never fight among themselves in front of an enemy and show their elder brother disrespect. However, now that the orcs had left, they could no longer hold it in. What are you thinking? You actually thought of negotiating with the orcs, talking about friendship, friends, and all that nonsense. Blakesia jumped up and down in front of Caesar, looking like she wanted to scratch his face. You actually signed a god's oath with those lowly creatures. Do you know that unless you have the power of a god, no creature can go against an oath? I know very well. Caesar nodded. He had thought about it carefully. The advantages of signing the alliance were obviously greater than the disadvantages. Now, the little female dragon's behavior was baffling him. He could not figure out what Blakesia was angry about. When he turned to look at Garen, he realized that Garen, who had always been obedient, was also acting like it was natural. You don't understand. You don't understand anything. You're not a true dragon at all. Blakesia was extremely angry. Her vocal cords rubbed together as she screamed. Her voice sounded like she was about to cry. How can you compare yourself to those lowly creatures? Those slaves, those lowly creatures. How can their names appear on the same sheepskin as the true dragon? Or Lorenzo? Garen, who had always been a man of few words, spoke as well. I know I'm stupid, but even if we die, we will never surrender and negotiate with those lowly creatures. Even if we don't have the ability to escape, we will fight to the death until the last drop of blood is shed. They had relied on each other for 7 years. Along the way, although they quarreled and even fought, both Blakesia and Garen treated Caesar as a family member that they could rely on. This kind of dependence was such that after hearing that Caesar had decided to migrate, the two dragon whelps packed up and followed him to leave the hills where they had been living for a long time without saying a word. Even on the way to the north, where it was getting hotter and hotter and made the black dragon extremely uncomfortable, they did not complain at all. This kind of trust caused their hearts to explode with humiliation when Caesar negotiated with the orcs. The two dragon whelps also resisted the urge to say a word. You let us down. Blakesia looked straight into Caesar's eyes. Caesar Orderonzo Tangerine, you have tarnished your name and brought shame to the house of Tangerine. The entire Black Dragon clan despises him. The trust and reliance that had been built up over a long period of time crumbled at this moment. It was no wonder Blakesia reacted so violently. I'm leaving. These lowly green-skinned beastmen make me want to vomit. With that, Blakesia turned around. Caesar did not ask her to stay. He understood. Although he could not empathize with the emotions of the dragon whelps, he could still understand their thoughts through Blakesia's words. The dragon race's views were very stubborn. They had extremely serious racial discrimination against the orcs. They looked at the orcs just like how humans looked at livestock. Caesar's act of negotiating and signing the covenant with the orcs was as unreasonable as an upper-class person sleeping in a pigsty in the eyes of Blakesia and Garen. The dragon whelps were not wrong. They were genuine true dragons. They had the dragon race's most deep-rooted understanding of other species. It was only natural for them to have such thoughts. On the contrary, Caesar had become an outlier in their eyes. The contradiction between their views could not be mediated. Then he should leave. Caesar turned his head to look at Garen. The two dragon whelps were slightly smaller than him. Therefore, he needed to bend down slightly when communicating. What do you think? Garen was stunned for a moment. He glanced at Blakesia's back and then looked at Caesar, who stopped in his tracks. His throat moved a little. Finally, Garen looked directly into Caesar's eyes and said softly, Orderonzo, goodbye, my brother. Garen followed Blakesia and left. Caesar smiled. Although Garen was usually stupid, he was actually smarter than Blakesia. This guy's last sentence was obviously full of meaning. He seemed to have realized that Caesar was not a true dragon, but did not care. Tangerine family. Why does this name sound so familiar? Caesar dug his ears and looked at the backs of the two dragon whelps as they left together. He was confused about his family name. Fortunately, the black dragon was not as pretentious as humans. Even when they separated, they were decisive and straightforward. He did not have too many emotional fluctuations in his heart. Come here. Caesar thought for a moment and hooked his claw at the new terror wolf leader. The little guy immediately opened his mouth and ran forward. He was about to enter the orc tribe. The terror wolf pack would not be of much use to him. He might as well give it to Blakesia and Garen. The wolf pack could still be of some use in the wild. It could be considered as his last token of appreciation as an elder brother. You're about to change owners. Go follow those two idiots. Caesar gently stroked the fur on the terror wolf leader's neck. He carefully controlled his strength. With the current sharpness of his claws, he could accidentally cut the neck of the little terror wolf. The terror wolf leader sniffed and then stuck out its tongue to lick his claws. Only then did it howl and lead the wolf pack to follow the dragon whelps. Caesar once again came to that strange and unpredictable space in his sleep. Ever since he obtained the first predator trophy, the display cabinet in Black Dream had fallen into silence and no longer reacted. As time passed, if it was not for the continuous improvement of his physical fitness, Caesar would have thought that the experience was just an illusion. However, this time, the display cabinet finally opened its doors to him. In the darkness, there were two bronze trophies that were as tall as him. Caesar was inexplicably surprised. After 7 years, Black Dream had not made any movements. He could not help but feel disheartened. He did not expect that he would be given such a big gift this time. 2 bronze trophies appeared consecutively. There were a few lines of words printed at the bottom of each trophy. Caesar hurriedly went over and looked at them seriously. Light of wisdom. When faced with threats, you can make full use of your brain to turn danger into safety, and turn danger into safety. The power of a verbal cannon is limitless. Reward. Nerve Reflex Enhancer Type 1. Caesar's gaze lingered on the words Light of Wisdom for a while. Combined with his experience during the day, he quickly understood that this was a reward for his series of actions after encountering the orcs. Was it a reward for strengthening his reaction speed? Caesar thought for a while and could roughly guess the type of reward. He then shifted his attention to the other bronze trophy. Alien, you are not related to humans, and you are not a true dragon. One of kind. Enjoy solitude. Reward, spitting weapon implant. Chapter 17. Although the dragon's breath was a physiological behavior, it was more of a natural magical ability. In their physiological structure, there was something called the basal blood vessel. This was an organ unique to dragons. It was an extremely complex blood vessel that looked like some kind of rubber water pipe. It had a muscular outer layer that could pump blood like a heart. This outer layer allowed the basal blood vessel to quickly contract and expand from one end to the other, pushing the blood flow to the upper stomach. That was the source of the dragon's breath. Dragons relied on their hearts to produce blood flow that gave them the ability to spit weapons and other abilities, while the basal blood vessel was responsible for guiding the energy-rich blood from the heart to the upper stomach of their muscle stomach. Therefore, the spit weapons that humans were accustomed to was actually a misnomer because the fire, poison, acid, or other substances were released from the upper stomach, not the lungs. To be more precise, the energy flow was vomited, not exhaled. Although Caesar had the same physiological structure as the other black dragon, unfortunately, his heart could not produce elemental magic like a real dragon, so his breath could not be mentioned. Therefore, the seemingly majestic dragon's breath had become a sore point for Caesar. But this time, the deep sleep had changed his physiology. In Caesar's body, a new organ was formed. In the upper layer of his throat, there were 3 sac-like organs that could secrete a special liquid. Each of the sacs had a tube and valve connected to the organ. The 3 tubes finally converged into one, and the exit was roughly at the upper jaw of his mouth. The matching muscle tissue allowed Caesar to freely control the new organs, but he could only spit out the liquid in the sacs. Due to some protective measures, he could not breathe air into the sacs. Oh, a strange feeling. After waking up, Caesar could clearly feel the difference in his body. He could not help but scratch his throat. His throat was itchy, as if something was stuck there. When he opened his mouth, the itchy feeling became more intense. Caesar could clearly feel that there were 3 switches in his throat that he could control, and his body was ready to move. Caesar controlled the muscle tissue in his body and decided to try the effect of the implanted spit weapon. When he opened the valve of the first sacs and contracted the muscles, a viscous liquid immediately gushed out of his throat along the tube. The next moment, the black dragon spat out flames. The blazing flames flashed and disappeared. When Caesar reacted, he immediately closed the valve. The 7-meter-long black dragon covered his mouth, bent his back, and turned his head around like a thief. If others knew that the black dragon could spit flames, they would be immediately shocked. Once the news spread, he would immediately attract a crowd. Fortunately, with the constraint of the god's oath, the orcs were not afraid that Caesar would not fulfill his promise. After leaving the specific location of the clan, they rushed back to the tribe without stopping. The 2 young dragons had already left, and their whereabouts were unknown. There was no one in this area now. How can I spit out flames? This is not scientific. Caesar muttered and decided to try again. This time, he stared at the front of his mouth and maintained his focus. His heightened senses allowed him to distinguish the images that flashed by. After he opened his mouth, a viscous liquid was spat out of his mouth. This liquid was made of an unknown substance. When it met the air, it immediately burned, forming a high-temperature flame. To outsiders, it looked like the black dragon was spitting fire. Caesar directly burned a small patch of trees to ashes. He tried. Under the control of the muscle tissue, he could freely control the amount and form of the liquid he spat out. In other words, he could spit out a series of flames, such as flame jets, fireballs, fan-shaped flames, and so on. Ugh! 2 minutes later, looking at the raging fire in front of him, Caesar burped. The muscles in his sac twitched a few times, and no more fresh liquid gushed out. In other words, the amount of flammable liquid in the sac could sustain him to continuously spit out flames for 2 minutes. The burning efficiency of this unknown liquid was very high, and it was quite viscous. Some of the liquid droplets would contaminate the surface of the target and continue to burn. Although 2 minutes was a short time, which dragon would continue to spit out flames continuously in battle. Caesar was already quite satisfied to be able to maintain it for such a long time. Moreover, one should not forget that there was more than one sac in his newly grown organs. He rested for a short while. When the muscle tissue supporting the sac was no longer sore, he opened his mouth and opened the switch of the second valve. This time, Caesar clearly felt the coolness in his throat. The feeling of the alternating cold and heat made him sneeze involuntarily. A puff of white gas was spat out. The white gas dissipated unexpectedly quickly. Before Caesar could understand what was going on, he found that the charred tree in front of him that was still burning with flames was instantly frozen and turned into a magnificent piece of art. Caesar immediately took a few steps forward and tentatively held the frozen charcoal with his claws. The temperature of the object in his hand was so low that Caesar felt a slight pain in his right claw. He gently squeezed, and the charcoal turned into countless ice shards with a cracking sound. Amazing! He could not help but exclaim in admiration. Such temperature and freezing speed were stronger than any kind of refrigerant he knew on Earth. The form of performance was comparable to the unpredictable ice magic. Why does it feel so familiar? He stared at the ice shards all over the ground. In his mind, he could not help but imagine the scene of the huge black dragon facing a group of human adventurers, shouting absolute freezing gas, and then blowing on it. Stop! Caesar shook his head hard. He was a little embarrassed. God knows where this shameful name came from. The liquid in the third pouch did not surprise Caesar as much. However, it finally gave him a spitting weapon that could be exposed to the outside world. It was an acid that could quickly corrode objects that came into contact with it. Caesar had seen Garen and Black Dragon's strong acid breath before, so he could not help but make a simple comparison. His acid seemed to be weaker than the dragon whelp's in terms of strength, but it had an advantage in terms of quantity. At least the young black dragon could not continuously spit out strong acid for 2 minutes. That would make them vomit out their gastric juices. After familiarizing himself with the spitting weapon, Caesar was excited for a while. However, he realized the potential danger. He was a cautious human dragon. Although he did not know the principle behind the newly grown organ that could produce and store such highly dangerous liquids, he knew that the other organs in his body had not changed. Therefore, if this key organ was damaged, the liquid would likely leak into the body. If that happened, there was a high probability that it would cause his death directly. Caesar touched his neck. Fortunately, the new organ grew on the upper layer of his throat and was located at the neck that was covered by his chin. This part was within his protective range. Moreover, if he did not deliberately raise his head, it would be difficult to hurt this part of his body in a normal battle. However, it would be safer if I had a large iron chin, Caesar thought as he touched his lower lip. Chapter 18. There was plenty of time. Caesar did not leave immediately because there was still something he needed to do. He needed to calculate the specific time needed for the liquid in the cavity to be fully replenished. He needed to have the best understanding of his own abilities. 1 minute, 2 minutes, estimating the time, Caesar laid his neck flat on the ground and focused. Asterisk, buzz, buzz, buzz. Asterisk, however, when he held his breath and completely quieted down, he heard the sound of bees flapping their wings. Although the frequency was very high, the sound was very soft. If it was not for the fact that it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, Caesar would have ignored such a subtle sound. Was it an illusion? Or was it an insect? Caesar shook his head and cleared the messy thoughts that were disturbing his thoughts. He focused and felt the changes in his body. In the cavity, the liquid was gradually filling up the chamber. After about 15 minutes, the chamber used to spit out burning liquid was saturated again. Then after a minute or two, the chamber used to spit out frost, and acid also gave him the feeling of being filled up. 15 minutes, huh? Caesar memorized this number. The time taken for the 3 chambers to fill up should be the same. It was just that the order used was different, so there was a difference of a few minutes. Asterisk whoosh. Caesar opened his mouth, and blazing flames gushed out of his throat again. Just like how a newborn child needed to learn how to walk, a newborn spitting organ also needed to be familiarized with it. He did not care about the consumption. His goal was to master his breathing as soon as possible so that he could be used in a real battle. At the very least, he needed to be able to hit a moving target. Oh, phew. During this time, he vaguely heard the sound of breathing. A black dot flashed past the corner of Caesar's eyes. The faintly discernible sound of flapping wings flashed again and disappeared. Was it an insect? No. Caesar immediately stopped breathing. His originally wide, vertical pupils shrank into a straight line. The vision of dragons was very good. Even if time was short, he could still see some clues. He caught the shape of the creature. It was not an insect like a fly. It was more like a human. Where did such a small human come from? Caesar's body tensed up. He did not want his fire and ice spitting weapons to be discovered by other intelligent creatures. At least not until he had enough ability to deal with trouble. Come out, Caesar growled. Fortunately, the bushes in front of him had already turned into scorched earth. After noticing the abnormality, it was rather difficult for the other party to hide. He quickly found the little thing flying close to the ground. Caesar opened his mouth and spat out a fan-shaped flame. He didn't care if the target creature could block it or not. The matter of the spitting weapon concerned his own safety. He couldn't just let the spying creature escape. Only then did Caesar see the full appearance of the target creature. It was a humanoid creature about the size of his palm. Other than the 4 conspicuous transparent wings on its back, it looked no different from a human. Ignoring its pocket-sized body, it looked like a 16 or 17-year-old girl. The little thing had a head of light green hair, and its body was tightly wrapped in a flower bud-like dress, leaving only its arms and wings exposed. Its skin was fair and white. The flames were vast and mighty, but to the little guy that was only the size of Caesar's claw, it was like a sea of fire. It only took 2 seconds for the entire area to be covered. It couldn't escape the fate of being incinerated. However, in the next moment, Caesar saw the glow of magic. This unknown life form's body rippled with light green waves. Then, its speed immediately increased by more than one level, and it escaped the sea of fire by a hair's breadth. Whoa! A black dragon that can spit out different dragon breaths. That was close. A clear whisper sounded. Forest fairy? Caesar's eyes became dangerous. The other party was indeed an intelligent life form, and after spying for so long, it knew that his spitting weapon was different. He quickly chased after it. Compared to the palm-sized forest fairy, the 7-meter-long black dragon was practically a colossus. With a nimble leap, Caesar could cover a distance of 4 to 5 meters. It was easy to catch up to this little thing. Bushes were pushed down, mounds of dirt were smashed, and in less than 20 seconds, he overtook the forest fairy that was scurrying in front of him. Then he displayed astonishing body control, bending his knees to suppress the inertia and stopping his body. Then he turned around and blocked the path of the target with his huge head. Because it was too fast, the forest fairy almost crashed into Caesar's exposed teeth. Before it could react, a large gust of white gas gushed out of Caesar's mouth. The frozen solution flowed into the outside world through the tube, and after coming into contact with the air, it quickly vaporized. It absorbed a huge amount of heat, causing the surrounding trees to be quickly covered in a layer of frost. The little guy that tried to escape was instantly frozen. Forest fairies, this species that sounded similar to elves, actually had nothing to do with elves. They were another type of life form. Regardless of gender, they were very small, only slightly larger than forest birds. Their personalities were a bit like a docile cat, curious and timid. Forest fairies and dragons had similar characteristics in certain aspects. They had very tenacious vitality and were born with an innate understanding of magic, although it wasn't very strong. They liked to live alone or with their partners. They were distributed in temperate forests all over the world and were very famous neutral faction life forms. The forest fairy in front of him had been frozen into an ice sculpture by Caesar. It maintained its posture of being about to crash into the black dragon, its eyes closed and its fists clenched tightly. Got you. Caesar was relieved. He peeled off the layer of ice amidst cracking sounds, held the forest fairy in his claws, and thought about how to deal with this little guy. This species was especially sensitive to magic. They could quickly detect the location and strength of magic ripples within their range of perception. Some of the more experienced forest fairies could even identify the specific type and name of magic. They were the magic scouts that humans and other races yearned for even in their dreams. Once they encountered one, they would immediately capture it and rear it. Because of their coveted perception and lack of ability to protect themselves, they were hunted down by humans and other races until they were almost extinct. Nowadays, this type of life form was already very rare, rarely appearing on the continent. Traces of forest fairies could only be found in some primitive forest areas. The other party had pried into his privacy, so Caesar definitely wouldn't let her go so easily. It would be best if he could take the forest fairy as his dependent. He could prepare for a rainy day. If he were to face a mage in the future, the forest fairy would be of great use. While Caesar was thinking, he suddenly realized that the little guy had already stopped breathing. What's going on? He shook the forest fairy in his hand. The little guy's body also shook along with him. It didn't struggle at all, as if it didn't feel anything. Is it dead? Caesar put the little guy on the ground and used his claws to poke her left and right. The palm-sized humanoid life form rolled on the ground twice, still in an unconscious state. Caesar smacked his lips. This was the first time he had seen a forest fairy. It was said that this life form's vitality was very tenacious, comparable to that of a young dragon. How could it not even withstand a single frost breath? After waiting for 2 minutes, he stared at the forest fairy who still didn't move. After thinking for a bit, he picked the little guy up from the ground and threw it into his mouth. Oh, since it's dead, I'll eat it. Chapter 19. Note: the name of the orc tribe has been changed to the Stone Crow clan. In Caesar's imagination, the orc tribe was similar to a human lord's castle. It was the kind of place where intelligent creatures lived with tall tents, altars, and bunkers. There were also many watchtowers outside. However, Caesar knew that he was wrong when he looked at the orc children who were working hard to polish stone axes and bone spurs. It was quite ridiculous. The settlement of the Stone Crow clan was located between the foothills of the hills in a basin that was relatively flat. However, there was nothing but wilderness as far as the eye could see, except for some tree trunks that were used to dry furs. There were no other signs that indicated that there were any intelligent creatures living in this area. The orcs wrapped themselves in animal furs and polished stones to make weapons. They accompanied the wolves and lived in caves that were naturally formed or randomly dug. They were exactly like the primitive people of the Stone Age. Looking at the orcs sitting on the ground, tearing into the raw meat, smelling the stench of the fur that had not been dried, Caesar could not help but wonder if he had made a mistake in his decision. Was it the right choice to form an alliance with such an orc clan? These guys live more like beasts than dragons. Caesar sighed in his heart. No wonder Blakesia and Garen didn't want to interact with them. If he knew that the Stone Crow clan was in such a situation, he probably wouldn't have signed an alliance with them. What a loss. Fortunately, dragons had a rather slow sense of time. To the orcs, 25 years was a long time. It was enough to nurture a generation of newborns into powerful warriors. However, to dragons, it was just a few hours of sleep. To be honest, the arrival of a black dragon in the beginning caused quite a stir in the tribe. Many orcs could only imagine the traces of a dragon from their ancestors' descriptions. There were very few who had seen a dragon with their own eyes. When they saw such a huge true dragon, they couldn't help but feel excited. However, as time passed, the orcs got used to it. After all, as the most barbaric and warlike race, they had hunted many strange monsters in the primitive jungle. Although Caesar was a true dragon, he was nothing more than a creature of this world. There was nothing strange about him breathing the same air as them. Moreover, they lived in the wilderness, and the pressure on the tribal orcs was very high. Not only did they have to polish and repair their weapons, they also had to wash and dry their fur, store water and stone tools, store food, and so on. Therefore, other than the children who were still curious about Caesar, the rest of the orcs left after a few glances. It was not that they were not vigilant against foreign species, but their old leader had already told them that this black dragon had signed a covenant with the Stone Crow clan. Any action that violated the oath would be punished by the gods. Out of their trust in the wizards and their respect for the gods, the orcs buried their vigilance deep in their hearts and did not show it too obviously. With no one bothering him, Caesar was happy to have some peace and quiet. He did not hold back at all as he skillfully used his sharp claws to open up another huge cave on the top of the mountain where the orcs lived. After spending some time leveling up the surroundings, a simple lair was completed. Caesar retracted his dragon wings and dove into the newly built nest. Then, he opened his mouth. The structure of a dragon's tongue was somewhat similar to that of a reptilian lizard. Although the tongue's length could not reach half the body length of a lizard's, its structure was more delicate. The dense nerves inside allowed the dragon to control their tongue and twist it into all sorts of shapes at will. Therefore, when Caesar opened and closed his mouth and controlled the tongue that was originally curled into a ball to gradually straighten out, the forest fairy that was hidden within was also revealed. Finally, she was slowly placed on the ground. Before awakening their magic, many young dragons would usually use this method to collect and transport treasures and sometimes food. Caesar had spent a lot of effort to study his own body, so he was very familiar with this method of transportation. Caesar crouched down and placed his neck flat on the ground. He did not say anything and simply stared straight at the forest fairy. 5 minutes later, the little fellow's body began to tremble slightly. After a short pause, the forest fairy seemed to have regained consciousness. She quickly turned around and faced upwards while coughing in pain. Cough, cough. After coughing twice, the forest fairy finally regained control of her body. She struggled to sit up straight and swung her arms to pat her chest. As expected, Caesar thought to himself, many creatures in this world would enter a state of suspended animation when they suffered fatal injuries. All signs of life would disappear, and they would only awaken after a certain period of time. It was an instinctive, protective mechanism of their bodies. In the ancient era, many weak creatures would use this method as a cover in order to avoid being preyed on by predators. But as the era changed, more and more carnivores began to consume their dead prey, and the protective mechanism of suspended animation lost its original meaning and was eliminated. Who would have thought that the forest fairy's body still had such an ancient mechanism? However, this little fellow had truly been tricked by him this time. If she wasn't facing Caesar, but another black dragon instead, the suspended animation would only stimulate their appetite. The forest fairy would have been quickly corroded by the acid and become a meal for the black dragon. The little fellow gradually stopped coughing and looked around her body. Before she could figure out where the stinky liquid on her body came from, she inadvertently glanced at the ferocious large head in front of her. Her memories before falling asleep quickly became clear. The forest fairy quickly moved her butt back a bit, opened her mouth wide, and was about to scream. "Shut up, or I'll eat you." Caesar showed his fangs. The little fellow's voice was stuck in her throat. She still hadn't recovered from the fright, and her reaction was a bit slow. She clearly didn't know that she had already been eaten once. Oof, oof. The little fellow was so small that Caesar had to get very close to see her facial expression. The forest fairy let out a small but unclear cry, then begged in a small voice, "Don't eat Luna." "You're called Luna? Forest fairy?" Caesar wasn't too sure. Luna Blanche Tearope, Offenstan Lavender Clepithia, Stinio, a string of random names came out of the little fellow's mouth. As expected of a forest fairy, Caesar curled his lips. The naming method of this race was unique in the world. In the naming rules of the forest fairies, the first name was their own name, followed by their parents' names, and then their grandparents' names. In this way, they could even trace their ancestors' names back to their ancestors. For the forest fairies, their names were their family tree. "Stop, I know." Caesar swung his claw to stop the little fellow's chattering. This was a kind of torture. Almost every forest fairy's full name could be said for an entire day, until they couldn't remember it anymore. The forest fairies were proud to remember their full names. "Are you done?" The forest fairy Luna stopped talking, then became excited, flapping her four wings. "Mr. Long, did you promise not to eat me? Can I leave now?" "No." Chapter 20. Of course not. Just as the forest fairy Luna was muttering to herself, Caesar narrowed his eyes and carefully observed her. He sharply captured this little fellow's mental activity. Pure, childish, ignorant. Simply put, she was naive and sweet. There was nothing wrong with that, and it was easier to control. Of course, Caesar wouldn't let Luna leave just like that. Not to mention that she knew some of his secrets. Just the forest fairy's ability to sense magic was enough to make Caesar drool. Caesar wasn't a noble dragon. Coming from another world, he had more or less inherited some of the black dragon's ugly nature. All right, these were all excuses. Stripping away the disguise, he was a selfish person to begin with. He coveted the forest fairy's ability and wanted to keep Luna by his side. It was that pure. Caesar didn't feel that there was anything to be ashamed of. "No. You peeked at a true dragon's privacy, and I saved you. We black dragon race always pay our debts. You have to give me something in return." "Save me?" "At that time, I thought you were dead, so I held myself back from eating you. Does that count as saving your life?" The black dragon didn't hide his greed at all. Luna's personality was relatively pure. She had almost zero experience interacting with other races. This little fellow obviously hadn't dealt with such a situation before. Her little face scrunched up, and she didn't know how to respond. However, being pure didn't mean that she had low intelligence. After calming down, she quickly discerned that Caesar's words couldn't stand up to scrutiny. The so-called saving her life statement had a serious logical error that couldn't be justified. "No, what you said is wrong. If you hadn't attacked me, Luna wouldn't have fallen into a state of suspended animation, and the things that happened afterwards wouldn't have happened." The forest fairy pointed out the loophole in Caesar's words. Her little face became serious. I admit that I was wrong about peeking at your privacy. I sincerely apologize to you and beg for the forgiveness of the great dragon race." Saying so, she bowed in the air. "If you need, Luna can make a vow to ask the gods to help me forget that memory. I won't forgive him." Caesar waved his claw to interrupt the forest fairy. He realized that he had taken the wrong path from the very beginning. How could he have put the other party on the same level as him when negotiating? This was equivalent to handing over half of the initiative. It was better to use the method that the evil dragon was best at. With that in mind, Caesar grabbed Luna and held her in his claw. Ignoring the forest fairy's pained expression, he breathed out white air from his nostrils onto her face. "Listen, little guy, I'm not negotiating with you. Now that you're in my hands, you have to agree to my conditions. Otherwise, if..." He had used a similar threat once when he was negotiating with the orcs. Now that he was using the same trick again, he was very familiar with it. However, this time was different from the last time. Caesar really did intend to kill this forest fairy. If the other party refused to submit and would rather die than stay by his side to help him, he would not let Luna leave. This was the only way out. Evil dragons did not need to make any expressions when they threatened people, because they were already ugly enough. Not to mention, Caesar looked even more ferocious than the average black dragon. Luna could not help but tremble in fear. She remembered the rumors about the Pinochet dragons. She heard that they all had strange tempers. One second, they were amiable, and the next they would eat you alive. That ferocious face and the smell of blood could not be faked. For the first time, Luna felt the shadow of death so clearly. The evil dragon in the legends was probably like this. Why you? You can't force a forest fairy like this." Fortunately, the stories of the brave forest fairies fighting evil dragons in the legends made Luna regain some confidence. She crossed her hands and struggled out of her fear, showing a warning look. "Luna is very strong." "You're very strong?" Caesar was amused and could not help but laugh. "What a coincidence. I'm the weakest dragon." "You're overthinking it." "I didn't mean that." Luna hurriedly waved her hands. They could not even defeat the ferocious species, so how could they be a match for the evil dragon? This story was simply ridiculous. The writer probably had never even seen a dragon. Since force did not work, then she would try coaxing. Luna thought for a moment, then tried her best to widen her eyes. Her eyes were filled with a watery luster. She squeezed out a tearful expression and pleaded with tenderness. "Lord Dragon, please let Luna go this time. Luna will definitely find a way to repay you in the future. So pitiful. If you don't force yourself, you'll never know how outstanding you are." Luna did not expect her performance to be so wonderful. I'm really a little genius." It was said that this move was quite effective against humans and also against other intelligent species. "Please wipe the boogers off your eyes." The forest fairy cried. This time, she really cried. Damn it. This black dragon was unmoved by force or persuasion. She could do nothing about it. Luna knew that this time, she was completely screwed because of her damned curiosity. In the end, the little girl had no choice but to submit to the evil dragon's claws and was forced to sign an agreement with the binding power of the gods. The content of the agreement was very simple. Caesar promised not to force Luna to do anything that would endanger her life, and she had to stay by Caesar's side and provide him with any necessary help. The content of the agreement seemed quite humane. Other than restricting Luna's freedom, there were no other terms that would exploit her. To be honest, Luna did not believe this agreement when she first saw it. This black dragon was so noisy, and she did not expect that in the end, it would only ask her to do such a small thing. She did not think about it. The forest fairies were pitifully weak. What use could they be to dragons? Other than the ability to sense magic, this species did not have anything else worth mentioning. Their good looks did not count, and in the agreement, it was clearly stated, once the black dragon gained the ability to sense, Luna would regain her freedom. This made her a little bit happy. Luna knew that dragons generally gained various magic abilities in their teenage years, and basic abilities like perception would be awakened quite quickly. At the latest, they wouldn't be able to do it past their teenage years. And looking at the size of this black dragon in front of her, it would at least be a teenage black dragon. At most, after 30 years, this black dragon would gain the ability to sense. As a long-lived species like dragons, Luna said that she was only 11 years old. She could afford to wait for 30 years. It seems that the black dragon is not as vicious and greedy as the legends say. Luna thought naively. She simply spent a day signing her name, writing 2 full sheets of parchment. Unfortunately, what she did not know was that Caesar was not a real dragon in the true sense. If she had to wait for this black dragon to awaken the ability to sense magic on its own, it would probably be hopeless. After the agreement was signed, Caesar left Luna aside and did not allow her to leave his lair, so as to prevent this silly little girl from running out and causing trouble. First, he used a half-threatening, half-cajoling method to get her to come down. Then, everything else would be easy. Chapter 21. Originally, Caesar was supposed to be able to live a lazy and comfortable life after signing the treaty with the orcs, but in reality, he could not do that. He could enjoy the life of a rice worm and rely on sleeping to climb to the top of the food chain. Perhaps other dragons could do it, but Caesar could not. In Eladia, it was not impossible to capture a few female slaves, get a couple of pets, and live a carefree, idyllic life. However, one had to have enough capital to do so, and Caesar's capital was only himself. Transmigration was really a very unreasonable thing. Why could someone else become a prince with power and influence, and countless beautiful witches flocked to him? But he could only become an evil dragon without any magic ability, and he had to spend a lot of effort to catch people himself if he wanted to find some family members. It was uncomfortable. Caesar sighed. He was the black dragon. Even if he just lay down and did nothing in the future, there would be groups of adventurers shouting for justice, and they would come knocking on his door, wanting to chop him into pieces of minced meat. This sense of urgency was constantly squeezing him, causing Caesar to have a very serious sense of insecurity. Even if he had received 3 rewards and signed the treaty with the Stone Crow clan, it did not change his mentality. So what if he had a strong body, fast reflexes, and the ability to breathe? When faced with the siege of a large number of elite warriors or the continuous explosions of spellcasters, could he withstand it? Indeed, until now, his growth could be said to be good. At least, no dragon of the same age as Caesar, regardless of the dragon species, was a match for him. But what was there to be proud of? As time passed and their magic abilities gradually awakened, the true dragons would leave Caesar in the dust. If it was not for Black Dream, he would not be able to catch up in this lifetime. He had to become stronger. If he was strong enough, he would not have to worry about attracting trouble, even if he did not hide his completely different ability to breathe. Power was the foundation, and power was the foundation. For the sake of money and women, he had to continue to work hard. Caesar picked up a bone spur that he used to pick his teeth. He frowned and started to write and draw on the ground. He was thinking about what to do next. There were thousands of ways to pursue power. He had to choose the path that would work for him. In his previous life, he was a person who had gone through many hardships in society. He pursued everything in advance and had a plan for the future in order to avoid accidents and failures. On Earth, the result of a business failure was at most going bankrupt, but at least there was still a chance to make a comeback. However, in Iradia, the price of failure was extremely high. Not only would one suffer the predicament of starvation, but one could also lose one's life. Therefore, Caesar had to be careful at every step. He was thinking about how to maximize his strength during this period of time in the orc tribe. He was also thinking about how to establish himself in this world and how far he wanted to go. Now was a good time. He had not yet entered the world's vision, and there were no enemies that he needed to take revenge on. Caesar had enough time to hide and gather his claws, and he also had a lot of energy to learn everything that was beneficial to him. In the blink of an eye, Caesar had been staying in the Stone Crow clan for almost a month. During this period of time, other than going out to observe the orcs hunting, he also spent a lot of time with the old chief of the tribe, Save. He asked the wizard about the principles of magic and how to cast spells. To be honest, when Caesar first asked Save to teach him, the old chief was quite unhappy. Dragons were the most representative magical creatures in Iradia. How could they ask him about the basics of magic? This damn dragon, was he not here to humiliate him? Fortunately, Caesar was an otherworldly black dragon with a mature soul. He was good at reading people's expressions. Soon, he understood something from the old chief's face that gradually turned from green to brown. After a sincere explanation, the wizard's face finally relaxed, and he agreed to teach him some basic knowledge. Save did not think that Caesar was not a real dragon, because this cunning guy first spat out a mouthful of acid breath, which was the most representative of a dragon's magic ability. After that, he began to ask the wizard for knowledge. From the very beginning, he had blocked the old orc's train of thought. When everything was over, Caesar finally finished his arrangements and returned to his lair at the top of the mountain. Little Luna had been hiding behind Caesar's neck and following him around. She was quite puzzled by his behavior during this period of time. Are you really a black dragon? You actually squatted on the mountain and watched the orc warriors hunt. You even asked the wizard about the so-called principles of magic like a human. This is unbelievable. Why? Luna frowned and pondered. Suddenly, she patted her head and jumped excitedly as if she had solved the puzzle. Oh, I get it. There was no one around. She flapped her wings excitedly and circled Caesar's neck. Caesar, can you tell me about your conspiracy? How do you destroy this orc tribe? As expected, the power of imagination was endless. The little girl had already imagined a great conspiracy in her head. Caesar ignored her. He waved his claws and erased the words battle and magic, written in Chinese characters that only he could understand. A month ago, he already had a plan. The reason why he went to watch the orc warriors hunt was to study the battle skills of this race. The Stone Crow clan was only at the level of primitive development. How could they survive in such a harsh environment? It was not only because of the strong bodies of the orcs, but also because of the thousands of years of battle skills passed down from generation to generation. They might not be the strongest humanoid race, but the orcs' battle skills were undoubtedly the best among all humanoid races. They were simply synonymous with battle. This was good. Caesar only needed to study the orcs' various attack skills thoroughly and find the most effective way to counterattack. Then, he would be able to defeat all the orc warriors in Iradia. The same logic applied to the old wizard Save. Caesar did not expect to master magic at all. He only wanted to study his potential opponents thoroughly and understand the attack mechanism and counterattack methods of the sorcerers. That was enough. He had this plan a long time ago. However, there were currently two types of spellcasters. One type was sorcerers who relied on their bloodline to cast spells, such as high-grade violent species, dragons, and even the forest fairy Luna. The other type was sorcerers who relied on their theoretical knowledge to gain the favor of power, such as the orc leader Save. Other than humans, most of the races who relied on their bloodline to cast spells did not even know the mechanism and theory behind their spells, let alone teach others. Caesar had humbly asked Blakesia and Garen for guidance on the theory of spells. They also tried their best to impart their knowledge to their elder brother. However, all they could say was general concepts such as instinct and thought control, which made him feel awkward. Sorcerers, on the other hand, usually had a clear understanding of the theory of magic and could complete the task of teaching. Therefore, Caesar looked for Save. After a month of hard work, he had basically achieved his goal. Next, it was time to move on to the next plan. Caesar licked his lips, the orcs themselves. In Iradia, where even ancient dragons could be skinned to the last drop of blood by the human army, the size of their forces was the key factor that determined their overall strength. In terms of weight, it was even more important than an individual's strength. Therefore, in Iradia, even the proudest and most honorable golden dragons had to yield to the situation and run around looking for their kin. Caesar naturally turned his attention to the orcs. Every evil dragon would more or less have some orc kin. One should know that if a race could gain the favor of all the evil dragons, it would definitely be powerful. The orcs were famous for their bravery and strength in battle. They were hardworking, loyal, and reliable. Other than being a little stupid and living a rough life, they did not have any shortcomings that were difficult to accept. As followers, being stupid and living a rough life was an advantage for the orcs. They were very easy to raise and were the standard template for forming the main battle force in an organization. If it was a month ago, Caesar would definitely not be so arrogant to think of subduing a group of orcs. One should know that he was only 8 years old. However, the situation now was different. He now had enough time to grow, and he also had enough time to abduct the Stone Crow clan. It seemed like it would not be difficult for him to recruit all of the orcs into his pocket. Thinking of abducting, Caesar subconsciously glanced at Luna. The little girl was repairing her little house with broken stones. She was so tired that she was sweating profusely. The strange expression on the black dragon's face made Luna's heart turn cold. She quickly threw away the stone in her hand and subconsciously hugged her arms. "You? What are you doing?" Chapter 22. According to the agreement, the Stone Crow clan had to ensure the Black Dragon's daily meals. However, during this period of time, they regretted their decision just like Caesar did. They were afraid of being dominated, and they could not wait to break the agreement. That was because this guy could eat too much. According to common sense, apart from the baby dragon stage, dragons were quite restrained in their diet and would not eat more than half of their own body weight in a day. Even the Red Dragon Queen, one of the few truly morbidly obese dragons known to scholars and adventurers today, would not eat more than twice her own body weight in a day. But this black dragon, the one who signed the agreement with them, the one named Caesar Ortolunso Tangerine, the orc warriors who were responsible for transporting the food were certain that this guy would eat more than 3 times its body weight every time. In other words, Caesar could eat 4 Bathmai horn bulls in a day. Note, Bathmai horn bulls are herbivores found in the grasslands, mountains, and forests of the West. They were first discovered by the dwarf Bathmai and got their name because of their huge horns. They are ferocious creatures that feed on grass, twigs, bamboo shoots, and tree bark. Adult Bathmai horn bulls are generally 4 meters long, with the largest reaching 5 meters. They weigh about 1.5 tons. Seeing the dark dragon wolfing down the food before them, the already green faces of the warriors in charge of transporting the food turned even greener. One had to know that the Bismarck hornbulls were not animals that were easy to hunt. Wild herds of Bismarck hornbulls were extremely ferocious and would often charge around wildly. At first, the orcs thought that this despicable black dragon was deliberately making things difficult for them. But later, they realized that this guy's appetite was really that big. Looking at how Caesar ate the Bathmai horn bulls without spitting out the bones, the orcs realized that 4 Bathmai horn bulls might not be enough to fill his stomach. Such exaggerated news caused a small panic in the hunting group. When they reported this news to Save, even their clan leader, who was the least like an orc and had always been calm, was shocked. He felt that his teeth were aching and hurriedly went back to his cave to read more information. Indeed, Caesar's appetite had greatly affected the Stone Crow clan. In order to provide enough meat for the Black Dragon, they had no choice but to send 20 elite warriors from the hunting team to hunt the horn bulls. This was already a heavy burden for the Stone Crow clan, which only had 60 hunters. In fact, the lack of food had always been a serious problem for the orcs. The wilderness was very dangerous. Some high-level monsters were especially powerful. Every time they hunted, there might be beastmen who lost their lives. Even so, these green-skinned orcs did not complain to anyone. Other than seeing that Caesar's expression was not good when he ate, they did not even mention this to him. Just like Caesar's impression, the orcs were very stubborn. There was a saying among this clan: the spit of an orc is as hard as the skull of a Pachycephalosaurus. They were true to their words and would never go back on their words. Although the work of hunting the horned bulls exhausted the warriors, they still had to grit their teeth and endure until they found a better substitute. However, In order to ensure that the Black Dragon had enough food, the normal orcs of the Stone Crow clan were getting less and less food. Many female orcs and little orcs had started to eat the preserved meat that they had stored. This was a very bad sign. It's time to restart the trade with the humans. After discovering this phenomenon, Chief Save had no choice but to make a decision. Damn the dry season, I think it's coming again. Caesar stretched out his hind legs and laid down in the nest. He raised an extra-large stone wine cup and took a sip of his homemade drink. I've never eaten something so delicious before. It's even better than flower dew. Little Luna imitated him and took a sip from the cup that was not even as big as a grain of rice. She squinted her eyes like a mouse that had stolen a piece of cheese. Caesar, you're really a genius. How did you come up with this idea? The reason was that when Kaiser was watching the orcs hunting, he found a plant that looked very much like mint in the wetlands of the mountains. Although its branches and leaves were coarser and thicker than mint, the taste was almost the same. Moreover, it was cooler and sweeter. At first, Caesar just wanted a change of taste. He had been eating fresh meat, rotting meat, and cooked meat. He was sick of all kinds of meat, so he would chew on a few stalks of this grass and keep it in his mouth like cool candy. But as the weather got hotter, he suddenly had an idea. He ordered little Luna to bring a few stalks of this plant back. First, he used fire to boil it into water. Then he used his frost breath to freeze it. In the end, the liquid he made was so delicious that little Luna stopped drinking flour dew every day. She would run out early in the morning and come back with a bunch of stalks of grass. She would try her best to boil them with fire and then look at Caesar, waiting for him to start. After interacting with him for a while and getting familiar with him, Luna was not as afraid of this black dragon as before. This guy was different from the other black dragons. He did not like to live in the damp and filthy swamps at the bottom of the river, nor did he like the rotten stench coming from his body. He even kept his lair neat and tidy. He was basically a flirtatious slut in the Black Dragon. Of course, these were all her unspoken criticisms. The real reason was that Luna found this guy's personality to be quite good. He was not as violent, vicious, and neurotic as the legendary Black Dragon. Apart from being so gloomy that it scared her when he was serious, he was quite easy to get along with, and communication was not a problem. Even you don't know the name of this grass? Caesar glanced at Luna, who was still slurping her drink, his tone full of undisguised disdain. She was a forest fairy, and yet she could not even recognize plants. Oh, phew! Luna choked and quickly patted her chest. She did not realize that she was in the right. In Iradia, no one would study and name ordinary plants that are not dangerous and cannot fill one's stomach. Not to mention the forest fairies. Even if you search the entire Iradia, no one would know its name. After saying that, she felt that this was not enough to express her anger, so she added angrily, even if there is, it must be something the guy randomly came up with. Is that so? Caesar thought for a moment. He wanted to ask Luna more about the local customs of Iradia, but he saw the little girl suddenly jump up and crawl between his thorns. Her expression became extremely serious. There are spellcasters approaching the Stone Crow clan. Hearing that, Caesar immediately crawled to the edge of his lair and poked his head out to look. Humans. In his sight, a group of humans that seemed to be traveling merchants, and their numbers were not small. They slowly walked into the territory of the Stone Crow clan. Chapter 23. In Iradia, traveling merchants were not a respectable role, especially when it came to human merchants. Some races even categorized them as liars and thieves. The merchants from the northern kingdoms spent most of their time wandering outside. They dealt with gnomes, gnolls, and other races all day long. They were very cunning and treacherous. The orcs even called them humans with 2 mouths and 3 hands. They had 2 mouths because they were good at talking and deceiving. They had 3 hands because they were unclean. They often did things like stealing and stealing. For the orcs who kept their promises, it was almost intolerable. Then why did they allow the merchants to come to their territory? Caesar was a little confused. He did not know much about the internal affairs of the Stone Crow clan. He could only hide in the dense forest at the top of the mountain and continue watching. Oh, my dear Gaul, you have to know that the accident last time was not my fault. I thought you would never need me again. The leader of the caravan looked no more than 30 years old. He had a necklace engraved with the family crest around his neck. He was elegant and handsome. However, his long and narrow gray eyes gave him a gloomy feeling. He was as thin as a knife. He was riding on a strong black horse. Even though the weather was getting hotter, he was still wearing a black woolen jacket and hard leather armor. He was in stark contrast to the orcs who were bare-chested. I never thought that we would meet again one day. It is my honor. My friend, if you need anything, just tell me. Food, the leader of the orcs said in a low, muffled voice. His name was Gaul. He was the leader of the hunting party and one of the leaders of the clan. Of course, the old leader would not show up personally. He was fully in charge of this. Gaul looked at the humans who were laughing and talking behind the leader of the caravan. He resisted the urge to break their heads one by one. Ever since he was tricked by the merchants last time, he did not want to see them again. We have plenty of food. The merchant squeezed the horse's belly with his legs and moved aside. He signaled Gaul to look at the heavy horses behind him. But Gaul, what do you want in exchange? Like before, fur. The Stone Crow clan only had furs left. Gaul turned his head to the right and gestured. Immediately, dozens of female beastmen walked out with large amounts of animal furs that had been dried under the sun. It's naughty again. The leader of the caravan clapped his hands, the grease on his nose glistening. All right, Gaul, I'm a merciful person. How can I refuse a friend's request? Let me think. How can I give you a friendly price? How about this? I'll make a loss. 10 caddies of grain for 1 caddy of fur. The merchant's words immediately caused the orcs to whisper among themselves. 5 kilograms. Gaul muttered, Roy, this is too little. The furs of wild beasts might not be important in the forest, but the orcs more or less knew their value. In the human world, this thing was a veritable luxury. It was sought after by countless nobles and could easily be sold out. It's not little, my friend. Roy looked at him seriously. It's different now. Those things of yours are no longer popular. The dry season is coming, and even the nobles don't need them anymore. I have to spend a lot of effort to transport these things to the south to sell them. And Roy's expression became serious as he spoke. He urged his horse forward and looked down at Gaul. Orc, do you know how expensive food is now? The northern kingdoms are at war with the green capital, and there are 30,000 mouths to feed in the south. The supply of food cannot meet the demand. My friend, I'm a proper merchant. I won't force you to sell or buy. If you don't want to, I won't force you. Perhaps you can go to the northern kingdoms and take a look. Maybe you can find a better buyer there. Roy sneered in his heart. Other than him, Roy Brendel, the son of a count, which merchant had the ability to travel through the wilderness and trade with these stupid humans. And letting these orcs go to the northern kingdoms on their own was even more of a joke. Compared to the northern kingdoms, the Stone Crow clan was like a worm hiding in the grass, easily crushed. Roy mocked in his heart and motioned for the knight behind him to come forward. He lifted his chin. Go and see what the goods are like. The knight dismounted and strode to the female orc. He picked up a piece of wild beast fur from the ground and stroked it with his hand. It's very rough. It was left to dry without processing after it was peeled off. It's also a little prickly, the knight said loudly. He then lifted the fur to his nose and sniffed it. There was obvious disgust on his face. Ugh, third sound. It's also not clean. The smell of blood is very strong. Look, Roy spread his hands towards Gaul. After taking her goods, I still have to send them to the mill for processing. And these things are not light. 1 horse weighs 7. That's enough. Gaul interrupted him. He was afraid that he would not be able to resist tearing the man in front of him alive if he continued to listen. He thought of the tribe's dwindling food supply and the black dragon who promised them a guaranteed supply. His voice was almost squeezed out from between his teeth. We'll trade. I'm so angry. On the top of the mountain, Luna leaned against Caesar's ear and clenched her little fists tightly. You said they're not orcs? Why don't they just rob these humans? Rob? Caesar's gaze lingered on the high-grade knights wearing steel armor, and he smiled. You think you can snatch it from them? They're not weaklings who can't fight back. Not to mention that there was a priest in this group. Just by looking at the smell of blood and the smell of blood on these people, one could know that these people might be merchants today, but the next day they would be bandits and mercenaries who would kill without batting an eyelid. In Iradia, where there was no law and order, most people were like this. Even with you, it won't work? Luna asked. Maybe. Caesar nodded, then shook his head. But the leader of the caravan might be a powerful noble. Even if we succeed in robbing and killing them, the Stone Crow clan will have to face endless attacks from the humans. He stared at the necklace around Roy's neck. Although he did not understand the meaning of the engravings on the necklace, he could tell that the necklace was not cheap. The material used to make it was quite expensive. Even if a normal merchant had such a treasure, he would not wear it around his neck and show it off. If there's no power strong enough to ignore the rules, then there's bound to be scruples in all aspects. Caesar sighed. This was the reason why the Stone Crow clan was threatened by him to the extent that they did not dare to attack him. But looking at the actions of the orcs, he still felt a little strange. What I don't understand is, when they've been oppressed to this extent, why do they still insist on exchanging food from the humans? Don't you know? Luna looked at him in surprise, with a look of disbelief. Because of you. Chapter 24. Because of me? Caesar shifted his gaze back, his pale yellow pupils staring at the forest fairy on his shoulder. What's going on? Luna licked the drink in her bowl and calmed her anger towards the human. You must be pretending, right? Don't you know that there are 20 orc warriors hunting the best wheat-horn bulls every day? Here, the kind that you like to eat the most. Although the best wheat-horn bulls are not high-level monsters, they move in groups. It's quite troublesome to catch them. The difficulty is almost the same as when you saw the orcs hunting the ferocious species. Why don't we try it ourselves next time? After saying that, Luna stuck out her tongue and wanted to lick the drink again. However, she realized that the cup in her hand was already empty. She flapped her wings and returned to the nest. While Caesar was not paying attention, she secretly scooped a big bowl of drink from the huge stone cup. I've made a profit. Is that so? Caesar did not notice Luna's little action. He turned his gaze back to the Stone Crow clan's territory and stared at the orcs who were trading with the humans. Before this, Caesar's attention was mostly focused on observing the orcs hunting the ferocious species and asking the wizard Save about the principles of magic. He was more or less indifferent towards the orcs. He really did not know that his appetite would bring such a heavy burden to the tribe. However, even if he knew, he probably would not have changed his mind. After all, this was a trade with a price tag. If the orcs wanted to be protected by a true dragon in the future, they would need to invest enough resources now. Otherwise, where else could they find such a good deal? This was not a fairy tale. What really surprised Caesar was that the Stone Crow clan was already in such a difficult situation, but they still did not say a word. They did not even mention this to him, and tried to persuade him to control his appetite. Interesting, these guys. Caesar stared at the green-skinned orcs of the Stone Crow clan for a while. He only turned around and climbed back to the nest when the humans left after the trade was over. Most ordinary black dragon had very little experience in their infancy. They spent most of their time in slumber. As one of the most sleepy species in Iradia, this situation would only change when they reached their teenage years. In contrast, Caesar was much more active. He had undergone genetic modification and did not have any draconic inheritance to digest. It had been a long time since he fell into a deep sleep. But in recent days, Caesar realized that he was getting more and more tired and irritated. Through his body's various reactions, he quickly realized that he was about to enter his third long period of hibernation. This guy became very lazy. He did not even want to leave the nest to inform the old wizard. He only greeted the orcs who were in charge of delivering food after lunch. Then he dug out a huge rock from the bottom of the cave and completely blocked the entrance, leaving only a small gap for the forest fairies to pass through. After that, He quickly fell into a deep sleep. Little Luna was quite dissatisfied with Caesar's hibernation. Although every time a dragon hibernated, this guy would awaken his senses and bring her one step closer to regaining her freedom. Luna hated the lifeless cave, the lonely situation, and the thunderous snoring next to her. The nutrients that Caesar had accumulated over the past few days were now being put to good use. The sleeping black dragon's body began a new round of growth. He gradually grew to a length of almost 10 meters, his wingspan reaching an exaggerated 20 meters. At the end of his four limbs, the toughness and sharpness of his claws had increased by another level. Even a casual turn of his body in his sleep would scratch out trenches on the hard marble floor. The guy's head also began to grow bigger, more like a red dragon than a black dragon. The muscles on his cheeks also became more developed to increase the force of his bite. To protect Caesar's neck cavity from the outside, his chin also grew a little. But the change was not obvious and was far from the extent of change that could be seen with the naked eye. At the same time, Caesar's fangs on the outside of his upper jaw became thicker, so much so that they protruded out of his mouth. Even with his mouth closed, it was very obvious from the outside. And inside his mouth, the fangs on his upper and lower jaw became thin and short. It was worth mentioning that this time, Caesar had grown 10 new fangs with serrated edges, densely distributed around his mouth with the other teeth. Time flew by quickly. During the period when Caesar was asleep, Luna, who had signed a contract with him, almost never went out except for occasionally picking some unnamed plants to boil water. She spent most of her time in the small house she built, and sometimes tidied up the nest when she was in a good mood. Dragons sleep for so long every time. Won't there be worms and grass growing on their bodies? On this day, Luna suddenly had an idea. She carefully approached the black dragon, who was huge to her. She needed to be careful because the spikes on Caesar's body were also very lethal. Every time he twisted his neck or turned his body, Luna had to quickly dodge. If she was pinned down by this big guy, she would not be able to break free with her current ability. When she got close to Caesar's body to take a look, a thick smell immediately drilled into Luna's nose. Ugh! The forest fairy made a gesture of nausea and complained, "It stinks." The black dragon had been asleep for long enough this time. Its body was already covered in dust and congealed filth. She knew that this strange black dragon did not like filth, so Luna tilted her head and thought for a while. In the end, she flapped her wings and carefully cleaned it up. This took Luna a lot of effort. It should be known that the nearly 10-meter-tall black dragon was no less than a colossus to the tiny forest fairy. Fortunately, since she had nothing to do, Luna still felt a sense of accomplishment as she looked at the shiny scales. So after every rest, the little fellow would still chirp and work very hard as usual. But Caesar did not know any of this. He was sleeping soundly. While Caesar was asleep, the battle between the green dragon and the human adventurers had escalated into a war. After gaining the support of the northern countries, the main force challenging the green dragon had changed from adventurers to a real kingdom's army. And in this tug of war, the green capital's jade had also spread far and wide due to its powerful strength. It had gained the allegiance of many evil races and was incorporated into the green capital's army. Both sides were evenly matched. It seemed that this war would drag on for a long time, until one side was worn down. After the sleeping black dragon woke up, his body's biological clock told him that an entire year had passed. It was now the dry season, and the air was hot and dry. Caesar crawled up and felt that the cave had become much smaller, but he quickly realized that it was because his body had grown bigger. The moment he woke up, his stomach started to cramp. He was hungry and needed to find something to fill his stomach. Caesar hurriedly crawled out of the nest. The stone crows at the foot of the mountain were still following their usual routine. However, when they realized that the black dragon had awakened and become even bigger, the orc warriors realized that their bitter days were coming again. Chapter 25. What was the difference between one evil dragon and another? Take the most renowned evil dragon in history, Kuin-gu, for example. He was a red dragon, the master of the Infernal Islands. He was the most vicious ruler of the Sea of Stars and the South Sea, committing all manner of heinous crimes. Logically speaking, if the evil dragon had reached this level, not only would he receive endless challenges from the adventurers, but he would also have to face the crusade of the human empires and the armies of various benevolent races. He would spend his days in fear, as if he was treading on thin ice. But what was the reality? Kuin-gu was living quite a luxurious life. He had established a renowned maritime kingdom on the Infernal Islands, and he was loved and respected by all of the races under his rule. Many red dragons had even pledged allegiance to him, to the extent that the Penishade Dragon Queen, Tiamat, was quite displeased by this. Kuin-gu established an army and controlled the Sea of Stars and the South Sea. He plundered the seas, then sold his goods and purchased precious resources from the empire on which the sun never set. At the same time, he received intelligence support from his allies, and he was known as the Lord of Hell by the people of the empire on which the sun never set. Its behavior was completely different from the image of a red dragon that wandered around and robbed anyone it saw. Then it ate until it was fat and drunk every day, waiting to be killed by adventurers. Caesar speculated that the Lord of the Infernal Islands would be able to receive intelligence reports as soon as the human or other races' ships set off from the docks. This information included information about the ship's route, berthing locations, birthing times, and so on, and so on. Back then, this fellow only needed to stay in his lair and arrange for a number of troops to lie in ambush at designated locations to enjoy the fruits of his labor. This was what an evil dragon should be like. Don't ask why Caesar knew so much about a red dragon. His deeds had been engraved into the Penishade dragons' minds, and he had become a role model for all of the evil dragons. However, Kuin-gu was a freak even among all of the Penishade dragons. If all of the other evil dragons could do what he did, the Penishade dragons would have already conquered the Iradia continent. But now, Caesar was here. He knew that Kuin-gu success didn't lie solely in his own power. In Iradia's eyes, even a legendary ancient dragon wouldn't be able to survive in the face of an entire army. Personal power was indeed an important component of one's strength, but it was very difficult to rely solely on one's own power to dominate this continent. Of course, it would be a different story if Caesar completed the achievement of reshaping a neutron star life form. That was a power that could sink Eladia. Kuin-gu's success lay in the fact that in addition to its immense power, it also had a shrewd mind, capable subordinates, reliable allies, and many other connections. These things could make it rich and powerful. Even if it suffered a small setback, it would have a chance to make a comeback. Even if its nest was destroyed, it would have a place to lick its wounds. If the entire Iradia continent were to be likened to a hunting ground, then normal evil dragons could only be considered carnivores. Only evil dragons like Kuin-gu had the right to join the ranks of hunters. No matter how powerful an animal was or how sharp its fangs were, it would still be shot to death by the hunters. Caesar was not willing to do such a thing. He was a modern man from the 21st century, living in a world where the living environment was much worse. He had to bear the reputation of an evil dragon, but he did not even have the right to pick up a gun. His power came from the trophy in the display cabinet in his head. As long as he could achieve something that was acknowledged by the Black Dream, he would be rewarded. This concept was actually quite broad, as long as he could reach the pinnacle in any aspect. It had been 9 years since Caesar came to Eladia. He had concealed himself for a long time, and it was time for him to move. He wanted to gather his forces, sharpen his claws, and speed up the process of obtaining his rewards. The black dragon lay on the mountaintop and stared at the orc tribe below. Its fangs were shining brightly under the scorching sun. No one knew if it was because of the sunlight or because of its ambition. Caesar's train of thought was interrupted by the cries of the orcs. When he refocused his eyes, he discovered that the orcs of the Stone Crow clan had gathered together in a circle, as if they were holding some kind of ceremony. Under the scorching sun, the warriors were beating their tambourines while the women were dancing and creating a cacophony of noise. They were singing in the orc language, which Caesar couldn't understand. Caesar felt that something was amiss, and he flapped his wings as he flew down the mountain toward the orcs. This is an ancient battle song that was left behind by the orcs when they were defeated. They would only sing this song when they were in dire straits or on the brink of death. Luna introduced the song to him as she hid among the thorns. She could clearly sense the tragic atmosphere and reflexively shrank back a little. Caesar's arrival attracted the attention of the orcs, but they didn't have the time to care about the black dragon. They were in a sorrowful mood, and the warriors tried their best to restrain themselves, suppressing the low growls in their throats. His gaze followed the orcs to the center of the field, and he saw a strong orc lying on the ground. The orc's eyes were tightly shut, and he was sweating profusely. He looked like he was in pain. Caesar squinted his eyes a little. He actually knew this orc. His name was Olcash, and he was one of the members of the Stone Crow clan that captured the Bismarck Hornbulls for him. At the same time, Olcash was also responsible for transporting the Bismarck Hornbulls to the top of the mountain. He was one of the few orcs in the Stone Crow clan that Caesar recognized. "What's going on?" Caesar walked towards Safe. The old leader also came and stood beside him. His face was as cold as the frozen earth in the south. It seemed like this wizard was as helpless as the others, and he was filled with deep sorrow. The old leader opened his mouth, and his voice was so hoarse that it made people's hearts palpitate. "We don't have any priests in our clan, so we can't dispel the Balrog's curse for him. We can only rely on Olcash to survive. I don't know what the Bismarck Hornbulls went crazy today. They forced us to squat in the Tulu Basin for half a day. In the end, we had no choice but to go back through the foothills." Another orc who was also responsible for hunting the Bismarck Hornbulls said, "On the way back, Olcash fell down." Tulu Basin. Caesar thought for a moment. He remembered that place. He had once brought the two little dragons there when they were migrating. Other than the narrow entrance, there didn't seem to be anything special about that place. However, because of the terrain, the Tulu Basin was quite hot. He still remembered how the two little dragons roared nonstop. What is the Balrog's curse? Caesar took a few steps back and quietly asked the forest fairy on his body. I guess it's the Balrog's curse. I'm not too sure myself." Luna poked her head out and whispered, "This curse seems to only appear during the dry season in the north. Its level is actually very low. If there's a priest around, it can be dispelled with a wave of his hand." At this time, the leader of the hunting party and the only great warrior of the Stone Crow clan, Gaul, passed by. Little Luna immediately stopped talking and shrank back. Caesar used his claws to grab the great orc. "If it's only a low-level curse, why don't you try it out with the witch doctors of other races?" "Gaul, witch doctor? What witch doctor?" Gaul was stunned. Caesar didn't expect that Iradia didn't have the profession of witch doctor. He choked for a moment and added, "Doctor? Apothecary? Shaman? I don't know what you're talking about, Lord Orderonzo." Gaul's expression turned ugly. He walked away and stopped talking to Black Dragon. He thought that Caesar was trying to humiliate the Stone Crow clan. How would he joke at such a critical moment? Were the lives of the orcs so worthless in the eyes of the dragons? "You're really strange. I know what you're saying, but I don't know what you mean when you put them together." Seeing Gaul walk to the other side, Luna spoke again. "Let's go back. There's no point in staying here. Only a priest can dispel the Balrog's curse." Other than being a priest, Iradia doesn't have any other profession. The skin on Black Dragon's forehead wrinkled. "Then how can you be sure that this is a curse? Did you feel the magic waves?" That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.